Hey, how you doing? Glad,
No, but I had my 6-month checkup last month.
That's right.
Yeah, I think now it's just every year. I see the oncologist next week, so that's all. You're very welcome.
Yeah, I just,
I mean, you see everything, see the kids dying, kids when you're going, why do you know?
that, nothing else they were gonna be doing.
No. Well, it's,
Really, really this morning.
like I said, all the way through, I'd rather never meet any of my nieces, nephews, or grandnieces, or grandnephews.
Come on, Joanna. Excuse me. When is this coming?
This is a 7 o'clock, and that's a 7:30. CVA?
Yeah. 9:30.
Because last night you started right on time, and I was 2 minutes late. Tonight I'm here 2 hours early.
Yeah.
You're so lucky, you know, so you can get a seat, because
How's everything going?
very well.
Good.
Yeah. Did you ask them to take your?
But, no, but I mean,
Would you like me to? Did you?
We can consider that. I would be happy to do that. Can I have a motion to open the meeting?
motion to open the meeting. Second.
Second, and a first and a second, and any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye, opposed, abstaining.
Motion to, pledge of allegiance.
I think that's part of the procedure that we need to vote on, so.
I was going to.
Could I get a motion to hear engineering first? Second?
Aye.
Joe, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Oh, you can do this. I'm going to clarify the sewer thing.
Right. I like that idea. Well, because you asked me, like, as soon as I start the meeting.
He understands.
We've just voted to move engineering to the top of the schedule, if that's okay with you folks.
Yeah. Mark has a new baby at home who's only sleeping 3 hours a day, so Mark would just as soon wait here rather than home.
You know, I was just thinking that. You know, he probably does a snooze there for 3 hours and gets him caught up on some things.
We have one correction from last night we'd like to make first.
Yes,
and that
please.
is, there was a question on the sewer enterprise budget. It involved that
Okay.
capital outlay, and it's on It's on page 50, and that $73,890 should not be in there. It needs to be removed. So when you vote your budget for that, please remove that number.
Okay, will do.
That's a mistake on our part.
No problem. Thank you for the update. Okay. Engineering is on page 22.
Told me today that it was all out.
Pat, you have such nice handwriting.
Pardon?
Mine looks like crap.
All right, well, then we need to have another conversation with him. Because I was going on the basis of what John said.
Okay. There are changes in engineering? On payroll.
What page are we on, 22?
22.
Yeah, Mark can address this, but we'd start by saying the big change in engineering you will see is under program purchase of service.
Yep.
You have seen for 3 years in a row now articles relative to I&I.
Oh, nice.
This has now become an operational expense. It will be in every budget from here on out. So there is a $50,000 line item for stormwater coordination. And again, I referred to it as I&I, but it's actually stormwater. It's been an independent article, and it is now time to incorporate that into the budget. So it has been incorporated into the budget. Some years it will be less than 50K.
Yep.
Some years it might be more, but this particular year, he's estimating the cost of 50K.
So when we are using capitals and we're usually borrowing in about 300,000 chunks, do we have a status as to where we are with that program and where we are with how much we've spent and what's left? And
We can check that out for you.
yeah, if you could.
In this particular instance, this 50K is no longer eligible for borrowing. It would not qualify for borrowing.
Because now it's an operational expense?
Correct. Now it's an operational expense. It is no longer a capital expense for which we can legally borrow.
What was the strategy there?
I don't know. Mark, can you explain that? Or I'm going to defer to the expert.
Welcome, Mark.
Good evening. How are you? So your question was to explain the $50,000 per year? Over the last 3 years, we've asked for articles at town meeting. I think one was 100,000, one was 60,000, and one was 30,000. I believe those were the numbers. And these are just articles to maintain compliance with the EPA stormwater requirements.
Right.
Outfall sampling, mapping, outreach, all kinds of stuff. So moving forward, there's going to be a new permit coming out for stormwater in the next year or two. They keep on saying it's going to be next year, but it keeps on being pushed another year. But either way, the next 5 years, I've come up with a plan that averages about $50,000 a year to maintain compliance with our current permit and if the new permit comes out. Most of the articles that have been used so far have been for mapping services, locating all our catch basins, all our manholes, and getting the connectivity between them all, and getting the location of all our detention basins and stormwater structures. Once you get that done, it's a one-time thing. You don't really need to do it again. You just need to, every time a subdivision comes in, update your map. So it's a very small thing we can do in-house. So essentially, that's what we're using the $50,000 for.
Now, the new legislation that was passed for flood zones, how's that impacting us? I understand there was controversy about them using California studies to base requirements for the East Coast and other areas.
That's a good question. It's a different program than this. The flood insurance program is a completely different program than the EPA MS4 program. The MS4 program is a stormwater program, so that's for any storm that occurs. It's how you convey the stormwater from the catch basins to your water bodies and how you treat it. The flood insurance program really deals with those large storms, the 100-year storms. There is some, they do mesh together, but they're two different programs.
Okay. The other change, it looks like, is GIS, or are we bumping up some activity there, or you buy a drone?
Nice. Thanks.
Is that the people
Actually,
GIS that came over from building and code enforcement?
Yeah, right. Well, we don't have I don't see an increase in GIS, but I might,
18 in fiscal 14 is proposed 18
Yeah, why'd it go down?
this year.
GIS operational expense, fiscal 13 was 17.5, 18 was, fiscal 14 is 18, fiscal 14 is 23, okay, so the request is 18, okay.
yep.
There's, so we're projected to, all right, so this is a good juncture, and it'd be good for the committee, and Susan, maybe you can help us with this, the adjustment column. Can you explain that to the committee?
Adjustment column on
We need to get you on a mic. But in general, the expense adjustment column per se, before we get to the specific number.
Okay, the adjustment column is POs that are carried over to the next fiscal year. They are actually rolled over into a new fiscal year. If they're a late 13 PO at the end of the year, they roll over to fiscal 14. They become part of the budget, and that becomes the adjusted budget. I don't know if you've seen it in the past. One of the reasons we needed to show the adjusted column this year is because we actually have permanent adjustments on this in the salary portion. So we need to show them on the whole budget. Rightfully, by the time I uploaded this budget in late November, the POs should have been liquidated, used, or gone back into the budget. There have been departments that have taken a very hard look at the purchase orders that were outstanding, that were rolled over, and that came into the adjustment column. And those will be those are liquidated. If they didn't roll over properly, and we have noted that they didn't, many of them didn't roll over properly. I haven't gotten to the bottom of why. It could be a couple of reasons. It could either be the software, or it could be the way they came through accounts payable and they didn't come through properly. And I don't have an answer for you, but those were liquidated. Larry Gray is somebody I got in touch with because I knew, there was going to be a limited opportunity to do that. So we've had some a lot of conscientiousness on the part of some departments to take a hard look at these and clean them up. Going forward, we probably will have a different structure where we will only allow encumbrance through July 15th, which is the official year end of the state. And you use them up and you close the books. If we close the books,
putting a new policy in.
if we close the books by the end of August or the beginning of September, they're gone and you're not going to see this.
Do you also encumber the appropriation along with the purchase order, the expense? So you're rolling the expense over, are the monies coming with it from the prior year?
Yes.
Okay.
And it doesn't change the prior year's number. We find it confusing. And that's, as Susan said, we will be changing the policy.
Good.
And we will be extinguishing all of them in early August if they're not spent.
Thank you.
So this should go away in the future. Again, it's something we picked up on only because of what we were doing this year.
Right.
And as you can see, it gives you a truer picture of the fiscal year 14 budget, because you're taking the adjustments and adding it to the total budget for 14.
Yeah, to me, it confuses me, so.
It is confusing.
Yeah,
That's why
I
we're
mean,
changing
town
it.
meeting appropriated X amount of dollars, we all approved X amount of spending, and this is not something town meeting approved, but is allowed. But if you're
Yeah.
taking the expense, as long as you're
you-
taking the appropriation, I I know
We
that.
actually approved it for the previous
I understand
year.
that, yeah.
And we're just showing that, yes, you might have approved it in the previous year, but it's being spent here.
And it's accounted for, incidentally,
Yeah.
in the subsequent fiscal year's expenditures.
Right.
So it distorts the picture, which is why we're going to do away with that
Yeah,
practice.
yeah, exactly. And it's an accrual, I think in the private sector, fiscal year means fiscal year. And so get her done.
Well, that's what the state does too.
Yeah.
The state does not allow adjustments. June 30th, you have to spend and take delivery.
Okay. I kind of been monopolizing engineering here, so anybody want to questions or Scott, do you have a question?
Had one, he answered it.
Good. Okay. Pat?
Is People GIS in this GIS operational expense line?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Ed?
He wants to know total adjustments, yeah. No.
Yeah, we should get 50 of it is that, but I just can't, I'm just missing the other date.
What page is that, Bruce?
Well, and some,
Yep.
not all of those adjustments, frankly, are this type of issue. Some of those adjustments are, for example, salary adjustments, reorganizations, that sort of thing.
When we moved, appropriate salaries between departments, the total adjustment, not,
Bruce, when did you get that handout?
it's on the,
Okay.
It's a
know that.
no, it's a document you all have. He's looking at the totals
I'm
page.
just going to have to go find it then. But it's a totals document?
yeah. It's at the front of what we gave you.
In the front of the book? Okay. Any other questions for our engineer? Oh, okay, the color copy, okay. It's becoming more clear.
Yeah. It's actually page 1 of your detail sheet,
Okay, great. When it's in
right
black
after
and
your
white.
index.
I didn't bring the Cadillac copy, I just brought the working man's copy. Mrs. Anzavino.
Okay, so I just have one little question that I want clarified. So the reason that we used to put the NEPs into the warrant article to get your money, and at that point in time, could we borrow for it, or at that point in time, we couldn't borrow for it?
I believe we were spending cash. I'd have to check for that.
Okay, but was it legal to borrow?
Pardon?
Was it legal to borrow?
Well, if it were illegal to borrow, well, first off, you adopt a general article that says borrow, appropriate, et cetera. It's got all the standard language. And usually what happens if it's not legal to borrow, our bond counsel steps in and says, look, you can't borrow for this. It doesn't fit the definition under the statute.
Right.
Right, and I understand that.
So
but
we would not be allowed to borrow for it.
Right, and I
So-
understand that, but Mike, you made a statement that you said that it's an operational expense, so it's no longer allowed to be borrowed, but I'm just curious as to whether or not it's because it's now becoming illegal to borrow for it, or simply because you put it into the budget, it can no longer be borrowed for, because that's a very big difference.
Some of it was ramping up. Once you're ramped up, it no longer is capital. It becomes the example I would use, for example, is if you're buying software. Buying the software is a capital expense. However, paying the annual license fee is not. So
And that's by somebody's definition.
by the state of Massachusetts definition, there's a
That's what I
definition
wondered.
under, help me here, Rick, chapter 44, section whatever.
Okay.
Right.
It's your
Yeah, I
standard
know what it is.
language. So I'm assuming that I can check for you. I'm not positive these articles weren't borrowed for.
Okay,
They may well have been cash articles.
whether we were changing it simply because you wanted it changed, or whether the law had changed.
To my knowledge, the law has not changed.
Okay. That's all I was wondering. Thank you.
It was cash, by the way.
It was?
was
Okay.
cash.
Yeah,
Last
if
year.
we want to
Yeah.
borrow for operational expenses, you literally have to become a Springfield and go into a receivership.
Okay.
It's
I was
not
just-
legal unless there's special legislation.
Yeah, but like permits, we wouldn't, why would we capitalize that? It's a,
Correct.
the license, it's a fee. So, but in the past, they've been two distinctly separate issues, the storm drain versus the infiltration and inflow.
Right.
So now, are we saying that we have combined those two efforts into this single line now, or?
It's beginning to become all linked together now as one.
Okay.
It really is. This is a big transition with stormwater now.
Yeah.
It's becoming the third utility, to be honest with you.
Okay, and we can get a reconciliation on the INI though, right?
Yes.
Good, all right, great. Any other questions? Jim?
Is INI not in the sewer department?
So the word I&I is essentially used for sewer, sanitary sewer pipes. The inflow and exfiltration out of the pipe, the groundwater coming in and
Understand,
the
yep.
water going out. It's not used with storm drain so much, although it is there.
Okay,
So if you-
but, okay, the technology is the same, but it's a different application in this.
Correct.
Right, essentially, you're evaluating the pipes, finding out where you've got leaks and addressing them.
Yeah, for I&I.
Essentially, the biggest thing the EPA looks from this is they're looking at the water body. If it's polluted, they want you to know the entire piping system associated with that, so you can go right to it and analyze it.
Right.
And that's what we're doing.
Sure. Well, we also get billed on usage, so if there's a big leak in a water pipe somewhere, and as well, same thing in sewage, we get billed on what comes out the pipe, and they monitor that. So it behooves us. Any other questions, engineering? Jim?
Did the GIS flyover ever take place?
No, that's still ongoing. The collaborative, it's supposed to be a collaborative between 20-plus communities, and that hasn't taken place yet.
Thank you.
That's that would be the fuel maintenance municipal depot, right? I think we've got a landing pad
That'd be
there.
under the fuel
Jet
depot.
fuel.
That's right, yeah.
All right, we're going to have to stop that. We're going to have to stop. Anything else for Mark or the Budget Committee on engineering? Hearing nothing, moving on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Recreation, Jim? Page 44.
To John Dennison for the Recreation Department. But I received some good responses, which I won't read tonight. I would like to commend the John Dennison for the fine out of the spotlight work that he does in the Recreation Department. He's a good man that is interested in his department. The department itself, as far as the cost goes,
Get the parks, this is gonna come up. Break down on this, why we went from 8.
there's a total 8% increase over fiscal 14 in that budget. The responses to my questions to him regarding the increases of these things here seem to be that he's spending money upgrading the fields. The one answer I was not happy with, though, was when I asked him I asked him specifically about whether the rental of the fields or the rental costs that they have covers all of the costs to the town. And his answer seemed to be no. And I don't know why he, I said, what I asked was, do the fee structures cover all costs of outside use of school facilities for recreation? For example, janitors, maintenance, repair, etc. And he gave me a one-word answer, which was no. I didn't like the answer. I'm hoping to be able to clarify that tonight.
How many of those fees, Jim, if this came up in your discussion, are charged against the revolving account? Right, those fees, the money goes into the revolving account?
Understand, yep.
And there are expenses that go against that?
Yep.
And some of that washes out, some of it ends up here on the P&L?
But the rec department doesn't deal with the school fields.
No, just there.
What school?
No. The West School fields, you don't get access to the school. You just get access to the field, inside that fence.
Understand, but that's really what I'm asking about.
Well, you asked for janitors too, and that's not in there.
There was, they did have access to the toilet facilities in the building. I don't know whether that's still
No,
on.
there's a new bathroom facility on the other side of the fields.
Is it really?
middle
Okay,
school.
all right, okay, I stand
They
corrected.
don't,
I stand corrected then.
we don't get access,
Okay.
nobody gets access to the school. There's porta potties there, the men's league,
I've seen those. Yep,
softball
yep,
league
yep.
kind of turns them over every so often, but
And his department, and Recreation pays for that, those porta potties?
no,
Who does?
Stoyak.
Stoyak does.
Stoyak put the porta potties there for years
Okay.
that the men's league would then use.
Jim, if John could get us a kind of a schedule, a rough schedule, high-level numbers about where he thinks they're missing the mark, because we did pass an article last year which gives us the ability, greater ability in charging fees. And I know that we raised those fees not so long ago, but there's
Yeah,
a
the-
maximum, I think there's a
The
ceiling
board
on
raised
them.
them recently. John took in an increase with the hope to come closer to breaking even.
Okay.
Yeah, if we're still not breaking even, I'm certain the board will be more than willing to look at those fees again when John brings something in.
Okay.
He gave me the attachment for the current fees.
Okay.
He did give me that. I'll send that out to the committee if you'd like to see it.
Terrific. Yep, thank you, Jim.
I would like to say that those fees are set by the Board of Selectmen, not by the Recreation Department.
Right, his recommendations to the board,
Correct.
who then, as a policy board, reviews them and approves them or not. Yep. Okay, all right. Anything else there, Jim?
That's it.
Anything else from the Budget Committee? Any questions from the committee? Roberta?
You actually approved those fees this winter, right?
About the fees, what I really don't understand about that is how can we ask taxpayers to
Correct.
subsidize
Okay.
private entities that are using these fields?
Okay.
Why would we do that? Why don't we have a fee schedule that is appropriate and takes
Well,
care of the
I just
cost?
wanted to clarify that with the chairman of the board. The chairman, the board adopted a fee change at the close of the season. The new fees kick in for this coming season. So we will not know whether or not the fee structure is adequate to recover the cost. It was the intent of John when he made the recommendation to the board, and the intent of the board when they voted it, to have a fee structure that covered the cost, but we haven't, nobody's using that field now. When the season comes, we'll see whether or not the fees adequately address the costs. If they do not, then the matter will be back before the board.
All right, so is it just the West School field?
Yes, most of the other fields are out under licenses, and the people that license them, the groups that license them, are required to maintain those fields as part of their license.
All right, thank you very much. I understand that, so we'll know at the end of fiscal 15 if the fees are adequate or not.
Hopefully, we'll know before then.
All right, thank you.
Didn't there used to be part-time salaries in this budget?
Say again.
Like the lifeguards at Ames Pond?
They're all part-time salaries.
So this employees line,
Includes all the part-time salaries.
okay.
As
So
well as the
it
one
just-
full-time employee. The department really only has one full-time employee, and that's the clerical person.
And all the other part-timers add up to the 2.55?
Correct. That's where the 3.55 comes.
Okay.
And that includes John's time.
In those fees, is that also going to cover the the landscape maintenance costs of the fields? Last I knew, I think that's about 50,000 in that area, between 30 and 50, I believe it was. Because that's done by an outside contract. I think Mr. Dennison puts that out to bid each year. So I'm wondering, just picking up on what Dr. Camacho said,
Are you saying, do they pay for it? Or
well,
are the fees sufficient?
Are the fees, do we also incorporate that when we calculate the fees? Because that's a contract that's put out to bid.
Yeah, but it's an expense they bear, so
And it's
What I'm
included
saying,
in this budget.
we,
Huh?
It's included in this budget.
Yeah, right.
no, I know it's in the budget, but what I'm saying, when we calculate the fees, that's a big number. It's, let's say it's $30,000 for the season to maintain the fields, to fertilize and whatever else is the contract. And if you're calculating fees for people to play in the fields,
Yeah, but it's an operating expense that it's included in the appropriation from town meeting. It's not paid for by the fees, I don't
I know that, but so shouldn't the fees, the point is, what does it cost for the town of Stoughton to provide these playable fields for these various leagues? One of the costs is the maintenance of the field. So you have about 30 grand, let's say, approximately, last time I knew, just there. So are we taking that as part of the total, say dividing it by 20 teams or whatever, how many people play there? That's my point. Is that going to be included in determining the fee structure, picking up on Roberta's comment?
I don't know, but you're free to check with Mr. Dennison directly on that.
Yeah, I'm just saying you might want to make sure that
Yeah.
you know, get some money back on it. Thanks.
Well, again, he has a cap on what he was allowed to increase those at. Last year's article, I think, took the handcuffs off of some of that,
Correct.
if I'm not mistaken. So Ed, just to your question, he could only increase them so much before. And so now we want to drive through 2014-15 and see how that looks, but he has the ability to go up more if he has to. I don't know if that helps or not, which he didn't have in the past. He had a cap and a ceiling, and that was it. Because they can't be profit-making centers, the revolving accounts. So, and there's only so many things you can expense to those revolving accounts. There's a pretty fair set of guidelines about what you can expense there and not. Okay? All set? Moving on. Parks, Jim?
46.
Throat clear in there, off mic.
I didn't realize that I had parks until.
Oh, that's right. Sorry about that, Jim.
Until I went into this thing. That's all right. That's, what I'm seeing here is that the bottom line is about a 75% increase over fiscal Y14. I'd like to be able to understand that. Equipment, trees, and grass supplies have about doubled. Equipment rental and repairs about doubled. And I don't know what the capital outlay additional equipment was.
The major increase in program expenses is for machinery truck rental, and it's for the rental of the
Bucket truck.
boom, to do the trees. And as such, they have to go out for that, especially if there's a tree that is a town tree that is going to fall on someone's property. And as such, we talked about it, and we made sure that there was adequate funding there so that they could get the equipment they need to go in and actually do the job with the trees.
But this is well beyond the historic norms for this line.
We doubled it.
Yeah, it has been doubled deliberately in order to cut some trees that have not been cut in the past because we didn't have access to the equipment. For us to rent the equipment is actually cheaper than hiring a private tree firm.
So that ash tree that's outside of my house that's dead now, I can get that taken down.
You should make sure it's on the list.
Except you shouldn't have asked here.
The other thing that's happened there is the board has asked the Public Works Director, and the Public Works Director has responded to plant more trees. So, as you pointed out, that line item's gone from roughly $7,100 to $12,500 because we will be planting more trees, and the trees we are planting will be a little more mature than trees in the past, And as you know from going to a greenhouse, the mature trees, or the more mature trees, are much more expensive than the seedlings.
Understand, okay.
And they survive.
Scott?
I've spoke to the superintendent on some of this stuff, and he's like catching up to a lot of tree work. Like, you'll see National Grid out there, and they're like, looks like clear cut sometimes going up the streets, because they know what's going to happen. With the winters that we've been having, it's been pulling some of the trees down in some of the areas and putting them at risk. Plus, there's a lot of dead standing. You'll have people call, and I know one of them that he had to take down was an enormous pine, and it was just dead right there. So they have to call in the crane. They got to have details. They had to shut the whole street down to pull that one down. It was over wires and everything. So that's why you end up with this large thing, because some of the trees they weren't able to get at before because the funding wasn't there. So now they need to do it before we lose the main power feeds on some of the streets. So that's what he explained.
Don't misunderstand me here. I'm only inquiring because it's out of the historic norms.
Right,
And
it's a jump up.
I'm wondering about the new philosophy, the new and improved philosophy, I might say, about the SMAC.
I think, as Scott indicated, because of underfunding, the tree work has been
Neglected.
neglected. I won't say seriously neglected, but neglected.
So this isn't your attempt to address climate change, right?
No. Nor are we trying to address our carbon footprint.
No such thing.
Steve, then Pat?
Well, if you've got a whole lot of trees to do, I would think it would be more practical at this point to hire a service to go in and get all these trees that, if there's a lot to do, first of all, because we're not expertise on tree cutting, and second of all, I think it's a profession that a lot of people get hurt doing. So I would think if we have a lot of stuff that's backlogged, it'd be smarter for the town to go hire somebody professional to do a lot of this stuff, and just after that's done, then maintain it on our own. But I think we're heading up the wrong tree. Excuse the expression.
I think that's barking up the wrong tree there, Jim. Steve?
I understand what Steve's saying, and he's 100% right, but sitting where I sat one time, we got to have hearings on certain trees, and we got to get the tree warden out there, and he's got to look at it, and it's a big, and then we get people chaining themselves to trees on Lincoln Street. So, you know, this is what you're looking at. You can't just go in and, oh, I'll take it down.
This is the department head's recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
I'm
And
just wondering,
Pat?
is there any plan for, or was it just a blanket, plant more trees? Is there like a plan? Is it like around the center? I'm just curious what the...
I think the long-term goal of the Board of Selectmen is to beautify the various entrances to the town, sort of spruce them up, provide more arbor vitae to hide some of the more less than attractive commercial establishments you see that are grandfathered.
Could we put a big oak in front of Alex's? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Mr. DeFelice?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one concern, echoing what Mr. Mitchell said. If you're going to be putting people in buckets doing tree work, first of all, there should be certified arborists doing this work. Maybe we have some people that have certifications. I don't know whether we do or not. Second of all, if these people are operating near the wires, there's additional certifications that arborists have to have that's considered to be hazardous, okay? We have within our own town at least 3 professional arborist companies I can think of at the top of my head. All do good work, all have the equipment necessary, all have the insurance necessary, and that's another item where, you know, if we do something and, you know, one of our people gets hurt, we talked about catastrophic injuries last night. When people do get hurt in this field, usually it's a major injury. So I would be very worried about putting our own personnel. I mean, it's one thing to have someone go out and cut a tree down in an open
Do
field.
we currently do this now? Do we
Excuse
rent
me?
bucket trucks and cut down trees?
The bucket trucks we have, okay,
No, but we do this now anyway.
well, then maybe we
Big
should.
trees, we hire contractors for, which is part of the bump here.
All right. What I'm saying is, if you're going to be doing anything large, we do have 2 buckets at least, but they're only probably, 20, Scott would probably know better than I would, 20 feet or so capacity, maybe.
We have to rely on the experts running these departments, Ed. I
Well,
understand.
this is my bailiwick. I think I know a little bit about this industry, okay? So I'm just offering you some of my knowledge. Take it or leave it, I don't care.
appreciate it.
The other thing I just want to mention, the thing came up about trees. Basically, your cost of trees is going to depend, as you get a little larger, it depends on the caliper or diameter of the tree, and that's what's going to determine the cost, how expensive they are. Usually under 10 feet, they don't measure the caliper. Once you get over 10 feet, they start measuring caliper. So that's going to determine what the cost of your tree is going to be. Thank you.
You're welcome. Scott, anything to add here that's important?
The only thing to add here is that Mr. Batchelor doesn't put his men up in a position where it's going to be hazardous for them. They don't work around wires. They trim lower brush. They do have a bucket truck. They do some small stuff, but he will not put them up. He goes out and he has the big tree care guy come in, and it's usually Malpe. They get the cranes. They know what they're doing. He will not put his men up like that. I can assure Eddie that he isn't going to do that. Just because we have a bucket truck that can go 20 feet, I think the highest they go is when they hang the banners in the square.
We actually have 2 of them. The fire department has one. I know that. I didn't think the fire department was out cutting down trees. Moving on to veterans, page 40. I'm going to try and maintain a bit more brisk pace tonight so that we're getting out of here at a more reasonable hour. So I'm going to be less lenient about extraneous discussions that don't pertain directly to the budget, just so be forewarned. Bruce, this was your area. I don't think you guys have had a chance to meet yet. Any comments or thoughts on this before we jump to the budget committee?
This is mine. This is mine.
Oh, wait a minute, Jim. Sorry, Jim.
That's all right.
Veterans are under Parks and Recreation. Veterans is under Human Services. Okay, I got it.
This is another one of those budgets I submitted a list of questions to. I got back a very fine response sheet, which I will not read to the group. I will issue with my minutes of meeting and the attachments with it, so we'll come. Mike gave me a very nice write-up on what his department does and responses to my questions. Just as a basic, the veterans budget has gone up about 10% this year over last year. They have taken the cemetery work that was done, and they have eliminated the cemetery budget and moved it into the veterans budget. The one item that was in the expenses for cemetery soldiers, fiscal 14 had $18,000 for decoration of veterans' graves, etc. They seem to have moved $10,600 into the veterans' budget to cover that. My question is whether that $10,600 is enough based on the $18,000 that was in there previously.
And Jim, that was on the advertising, decoration, cemetery expense line underneath veterans' experience? Okay.
Yep.
The 18 was including an adjustment from 2013.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So the budget was 10,000 for 14.
That's correct.
We just carried forward the fiscal 14 appropriation. We did not need to carry forward the adjustment. The adjustment put it up to 18. The actual fiscal 14 budget was 10,000, and that's what we put into the veterans.
I suspected that was the response. I just wanted to ask the question.
Okay. Any other questions here?
Other than that, I had no other comments. There was the big jumps for the veterans' benefits and the advertising. We're saying that was because of the increased workload that he's got to do and with the group.
Okay. One question that I have is more procedural, but how are monies received and expensed for this process? So we've got $500,000 in veterans benefits. How do we dispense it, and how do we get reimbursed? Is it just a check from the general fund and from the state?
In the same year.
Right, it's offset.
So, and then Susan can explain how the benefits are paid.
They're paid on every accounts payable warrant. There's checks that go out for different.
From the town of Stoughton.
Right. There are
Okay.
checks that go out for different purposes. It might be medical. There's very little nursing home that I've seen, and the direct benefits.
Okay. So our accounting staff goes through all of that and makes
And
sure
I've
everything's-
gone through it pretty thoroughly.
Okay, good.
Also.
All right, great, thank you. Ed?
It's a question on this budget. On the cemetery and the soldiers expense line for fiscal 15, there's nothing in there, it's blank.
Because it's been moved into the budget above.
This budget.
It's buried in
Yeah,
another number?
on that line item right there.
All right.
It's no longer a separate
It's a
budget.
departmental purchase of services.
Right, the new expense line says cemetery on it there, Ed. Okay. Any, Pat?
Just, Jim, I don't know if you have any indication, but this budget's always a concern because it just constantly increases.
Sorry,
Do you know, does he feel confident on that number with the $50,000 increase for the veterans' benefits, or is it still a moving target?
Mike,
It's a rhetorical question,
it's a
right?
moving target. Mike is anticipating.
hopeful.
Mike is anticipating on the basis of the number of veterans that are applying, that he's reaching out to, that are applying to this thing here, that there will be an increase in the number of veterans that he's serving, thus the number of the amount of money that's being paid out for.
Okay, thanks.
You might be hopeful, but it will always remain a moving target.
I just thought maybe the rates are slowing, but
We're extremely familiar with that.
Yeah.
We've asked for a list of the veterans that live in town and can't get that list. How many do we have? No idea. Or,
Actually, it's not, you could not extrapolate even the need.
I know, but we
from that
tried to get
because-
that so we could project the expense.
Well, you
to some
couldn't
extent.
even do that because you have dependents and you have widows.
Surviving spouses.
And
right.
you will, it's a moving target you will never be able to quantify.
Yep. Next year.
We get 75% reimbursement, and Mike's reimbursements run roughly at 75%, which means everybody he's serving is eligible. There have always been questions about, is he serving non-residents, and the answer is no. Otherwise, we wouldn't get reimbursement for them. I can say that one of the areas that's growing for him is that, unfortunately, the Korean veterans are beginning to die out, and they're leaving widows, and many times the widows don't have a lot of money coming in, and under the rules and regulations, those widows are eligible for service and assistance, and Mike is assisting those folks. And so it's not just the veteran, but you're seeing, as the various generations, most of the World War II folks are gone, so now the older folks are Korean and Vietnam. And the actual vets are beginning to die off, but their widows are in fact eligible, and that's an area that's growing. Unfortunately, some of the folks who are old enough to have served in Vietnam are also beginning to die because they would be in their mid to upper 60s, and those widows are beginning to show up. And it's, in some cases because folks didn't do good estate planning. In some cases, all they have for retirement is their Social Security, and the widow's benefit on Social Security is not the same as the Social Security benefit. So,
the revenue shows back up under Massachusetts. Well, it's the cherry sheet receipts, and the sub sheet that it's on is unrestricted general government aid. And this year, we're projecting $432,831 from 14, it's going to roll into 15 as a revenue. And so it'll show up on the revenue sheet all the time, okay? Other questions? Okay, moving on. Community events. Page 45. Jim, you seem to have the monopoly here.
This
Yeah,
is,
I know.
nearly done. This is a new budget page. The items in this account were extracted out of the selectmen's budget last year. I don't disagree with the numbers, but I have trouble reconciling what's on the budget sheet right now, $45,748 for the fiscal 14 total budget. I have trouble reconciling that to Bill Rowe's expense control report that we received last evening that says that the year-to-date adjusted budget for community events was $41,954.
When you look at a budget, the adjustments can change if a bill was paid between the time this was uploaded. It's really just a picture in time on your adjustments. If we've paid a bill or a purchase order has been liquidated in another way, the adjustment is going to go down, and therefore the total adjusted budget is going to change. And I suspect that may have happened.
That's why it's confusing.
The problem, I guess the problem I have then is which either one of these numbers is correct, the Bill's number, then the 39,680 looks inadequate to me.
Well, the 39,680 is exactly the budget for fiscal 14. And again, one of the reasons why we're trying to clean up the area of adjusted budgets is because it is confusing. The 39,680 will be sufficient. Just for the record, it does include the Memorial Day and Veterans Day celebrations, which previously were in the veterans budget and has now been moved to community events because they are community events. However, they are still administratively under the control of the veterans agent.
Yeah, it's a $6,000 adjustment that kind of obfuscates this a little bit. So,
okay. All right.
Now we have local support from businesses in the area for some of these events. Is that true?
I believe there is a donation that is made from a large company in town that simply goes into the general fund. That is typically used for the fireworks, which is one of the items that's included in here.
Okay.
They don't fund the fireworks directly because they don't want the liability. There are also businesses in town that donate prizes, for example, for the Easter egg hunt and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of community participation in that regard that doesn't show up in the budget.
Okay, so you're not like for grants, for example, next year you're going to make more of an effort to show that revenue in expense pages as they occur, in the line item.
Yeah,
Is this something that you would include
we would
as
show
well?
cash, but not in kind.
Okay.
So for example, like I believe Walgreens has a standing history with the committee of donating toys that are used in as prizes for the Easter egg contest or whatever it is. The annual event we have every year. There are other people who donate things for Kids Day. Okay. Those are in kind, and we don't account for those. But
it might bear a footnote in the budget that this is offset, 25% of this is offset by a local, it's at least 25%, I think. Yeah.
The other thing is that it's my understanding from talking to Bill Rowe that there is actually a revolving fund for community events. It has not been used. And that is something that we will explore in future years, because as you know, the town meeting has to every year authorize.
Right, reauthorize use.
And
of
we've
revolving
not been
funds.
authorizing for community events, but Bill assures me that at some point in time, town meeting did in fact create a revolving fund for community events.
Good.
So we will be looking at that in the future.
1 minute there. Ms. Welch?
The manager's answer was more than adequate, thank you.
Mrs. Colburn?
So the Memorial Day budget is gone.
It's
Rolled into
been
this.
folded in here.
Wouldn't we still see it zeroed out, much like we've seen other departments that are gone, or am I missing it?
From the veterans?
Yeah, it was.
Oh, was it zeroed out last year?
Its own ledger.
It's a separate budget.
Account.
Yeah, and now
We
it's,
had money in it last year, so wouldn't we see it now as a zero? No?
you probably should have, yes.
Yeah, we didn't include a budget that was done away with.
So if you take the comparison under,
Right.
Well, you did, I think Pat's dilemma is that you included the cemeteries
Right.
in the veterans, but
Right.
now.
yeah,
Memorial
you're
Day is
asking why
missing.
we didn't zero it out in the veterans budget, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's because we neglected to do
Okay.
so.
Thank you.
Okay,
And
any other
it does account
questions?
for the increase from 13 to 14 if you look in the community events.
Okay, so the community events is the Memorial Day budget and taken from selectmen.
No, yes. Two sources. One
Okay.
came from the veterans, but the administrative responsibility remains under the Veterans Agent. The administrative responsibility for the Community Events Committee has shifted or will shift from the manager's office to the Recreation Department on July 1st. That's another change.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So,
Moving on, town clerk, page 16. Yes? Okay. Thank you, Scott. Okay.
Just being facetious.
All right, so Bruce, this is your subcommittee.
Yeah, we haven't met yet.
Okay. Now, there are changes afoot here, so
I'm gonna let you
could
do
you walk
this.
us through those?
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
gonna ask Jamie to do that because he actually put this budget together as acting town clerk.
Right, good.
So I'll
Perfect.
step away. No.
We took the elections, registrar's budget, and, trying to think what the third one was. Elections, registrar,
moderator.
oh, and the moderator expenses, and folded it all into the town clerk's budget.
Okay, so, but there are changes. Are there organizational changes here? What's changing in the clerk's department?
Okay, we have created a program administrator 2 position
Is this in addition to staff?
and done away with the principal clerk position.
Okay, so it's a swap. Okay,
It was a clerk to the Board of Registrars,
okay, so clerk,
has become a program administrator 2 position.
program.
Yeah.
The clerk in the registrars, the previous budget that was the registrars, is now a program administrator 2 within the clerk's office.
Okay, all right, okay.
Rick?
It is the person who will act in place of the town clerk upon the town clerk's absences.
So were you requiring appropriate certifications for those folks, or?
Yes.
Okay,
That person is in fact been going to school.
It's a 3-year process.
okay.
End of the 3 years, she will be certified.
Okay,
It's part of the succession planning effort.
all right. Bruce?
The fact that you rolled those 2 budgets into this one budget? Is that why the employee count doesn't change?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a swap out, really. That clerk for this new program administrator too?
No, it's just the fact that the old budget, like, I would assume that if they were still separate,
Well,
the town
what-
clerk's
what
department
you-
would have 3 and the registrar would have
What you
1.
see here in fiscal 13 and fiscal 14 are pro forma
Yeah.
budgets from
Yeah,
putting
that's why
them
I was just
together.
making sure that those two, this is now reflective of all 3 of those.
Yes.
Correct.
Or 4, really, the town clerk,
Right.
elections, registrar, and the expense for the moderator.
Again, the pro forma budgets were done in an attempt to minimize any confusion.
Pat? I'm sorry, Steve, then Pat.
I still have concerns about this being transferred out of the moderator's budget, so I have nothing bad to say about the new clerk. I don't know anything about it. They're probably doing a great job, but in the past, we've had a lot of problems, and I just think this is a bad time. Town meeting is one of the most important things we do. With all the money we spend, I think this is not the time to do this. Thank you, Chairman.
I conferred with town council today, and town council advised me that to appropriate funds, we need a person, an employee, department head, such as the town clerk, to approve the expenditures of appropriated funds. We do not have a stipended elected official doing it. There's one exception, as you know, and that's the selectman.
Pat, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, the fact that we're zeroing out other budgets and bringing them here, is it enough to just approve this new budget? Do we have to hear the old budgets is zeroed out? So we're okay, the fact that we don't have those listed as budgets in public hearings, we're okay with that?
What you would find in most towns that it would all be in one budget. Again, as we indicated last night, the electoral process belongs to the town clerk by statute.
No, I understand. I'm just saying, you know, the fact that we didn't have it.
understand. Procedurally,
We didn't hear registrars as 0. Is that okay? We're okay?
procedurally, if you approve this, yes.
It's okay that we zeroed them, okay.
And so the board knows, we checked with the elections division in Boston, and if there are any reimbursements or funds coming from the state for the conduct of elections, they were fine with us combining these budgets into one and having it all go through the clerk's office, because that is what is done in most communities.
Okay. I guess I want to emphasize, these decisions were not made in a vacuum. They were not made with any malintent. They were made to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of town government.
Okay. Mrs. Anzavino.
Okay, so last night there was a lot of discussion about standing committees and having a secretary for them, and I was under the impression that that number had now gone into this budget, and I was wondering if it's there.
The office supplies from the moderator's budget the amount was added to the clerk's budget, and as such, it's an increase where you take the two together. Printing and stationery, we looked at the actual from 13 and then decided that we were not going to increase it because 14 was so much more than 13, and that's because it's an even year, and now we're going into an odd year, so we should have gone back. So that took into account any expense the moderator's office would have in printing and stationery. As far as advertising, and that was taken into account with the increase. The supplies for the town meeting committees was taken into account, and in fact, we increased it slightly. The voting supplies, we put the voting supplies at fiscal 13 because fiscal 14 voting supplies were very low because they used a lot of it from 13, and so we wanted to make sure that we covered it by, especially with elections, if you cover it every other year.
$3,000. Staff.
Oh, and yeah, the $3,000 for staff. I originally budgeted $2,500, and the selectmen added another $500 for the $3,000.
And that's included under the employees item.
So that's why it's 4? You're not counting the secretary who's going to be for the standing committee?
Pardon?
You said that you put in money for the secretary for the standing committee, but you have 4 FTEs, and now you still have 4 FTEs.
It should be 4 plus.
Should be 4 plus some fraction.
Okay. When we did the budget, I had no basis for the number of hours. Should be 4 point, probably 2 to 3.
Yeah. And he came up with the $2,500 based upon what had been spent in the past for that function. The board was concerned that $2,500 might not be enough, so by virtue of their vote, it was bumped up to $3,000.
There was one item that I zeroed out, and that was an item for awards.
What are awards?
And
Gonna wait a
Would you wait a year for these guys? You know?
And as far as I was concerned, as acting town clerk, I considered it inappropriate use of public funds. If you people want to put it back, let it be on your head.
Wait, that's right.
That came right out of The Odd Couple, I think.
Well, I do consider it an inappropriate use of funds, especially if, depending on where the awards are fabricated.
Well, those are 2 different questions.
Yeah.
Yes, Mrs. Colvin?
No, I considered it that as acting clerk, and if someone wants to put it back in the clerk's budget now, that would come from your recommendation.
Can we put it in the selectmen's chair's budget somewhere?
Sure.
I actually consider that.
You guys do the budget article, you can put it anywhere you want.
That's right.
Maybe you want to put it as a separate item, or in your appropriation.
So for 9 years of service, you consider that an inappropriate award? Okay, go ahead.
A handshake is usually appropriate in most communities.
It is.
I'm not even
It's not
gonna
expected either.
comment on that. I forgot to ask what the capital outlay, 10,000, what will that be used for in this department? Because it won't be used for awards.
It's computers and furniture.
Is it just a plug number, or do you have computers and furniture that you intend to buy here?
Actually, it was inherited from the previous office holder. That was an estimate that she had in her files, and
And then
But we
didn't
bought her,
spend.
but we bought her computers last year. At least we approved the funding of it.
I'm not
Between the registrar's department, by the way, and the clerk's department.
I'm not sure that they were purchased because of her quick exit out the door and across state lines.
Yes, sir. Steve?
I didn't approve any purchase of computers while I was there.
Is there a need for, is there something that is being identified here, or are you just trying to?
I know there's a need for furniture.
Okay.
I watch, over the years, I watch our senators and representatives and governors give out awards all over the place. It's not, is it legal at their end and it's not legal at ours?
For the Finance Committee, apparently it is.
Okay.
I was jesting.
It's going back.
I didn't say it was.
It's not illegal. The Human Resources Director / acting town clerk at the time deems it inappropriate. Yes, Mr. Rock.
Where in this, what line item would Howard's stipend be in?
That's still in
The moderator's
moderator.
budget.
Oh, okay,
That's in the, that's all that's left in the budget for the moderator.
Okay.
Is his stipend.
gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me
I
see.
want to ask a question.
So Bruce, note to clerk's budget awards. Dr. Camacho.
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Hill. About the awards. Wait, no, I'm not trying to prolong the meeting. The awards, as far as awards go, does this mean that the town clerk has been in charge of ordering all the awards that we've seen over?
No, it was in the moderator's budget.
So,
The awards just for the, I think, just for Finance Committee, right? I don't think the moderator gave out any other, that's right, there are 25-year awards for town meeting representatives, I believe, or a 30-year award, or something of that nature, traditionally has been also part of the recognition. We're going to need to really revisit
Right.
this.
Selectmen used to get a chair.
That's why I said we should fold it into their line, the chair line.
Most communities fund those type of things privately or from donations.
Okay, do you have, is that anecdotal information? Or do you
That's
have
anecdotal right now, but
have
I'll be
statistical
I'll be
information to
glad
bear
to
that out,
I'll be
please?
glad to put it out on the
Empirical
MMA.
data only, please.
I'll put it out on the MMA comment and have my compatriots in the MMA get back to me on it.
Thank you.
no, I'm serious about this. The awards, all right, the awards are gone from here. I think that means the 9-year plaque for the Finance Committee that Mr. Hanson used to have drawn up. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, across the board in the town, there are other awards that are given. Now, how they're paid for, I don't know, and I have no idea of how they're paid for. But the question is, what's right for one is right for the other. So if there are no awards here, then there should be no awards given or paid for with any municipal or governmental funds in any department. That's my point.
I have no argument with you. I agree.
All right.
I was not I was
So
not
I don't think
responsible for
we
the other
can.
accounts.
My point is, we cannot pick and choose. It has to be one way or the other way. Awards stay in here, or they go from every place.
Well, we'll have our recommendation, so. Any other questions on this budget? Ed, please, if it's important, we need to move this meeting along. Please, to the mic.
We,
Hang on,
Yeah.
I've given the floor to.
Would it be easier for the administration to call them plaques instead of awards? Would that be a better way of wording this, and would that take the idea out of a monetary award? So why don't we just call them plaques?
Yeah,
Because that's what they are.
I don't think that we need
And-
to devote any more discussion time to this, so
Thank you.
let's move on. Thank you. Town clerk, human resources. Page 21. Let's see if there's any plaques in there.
Yeah, is there a line item for awards? Yeah, but he didn't do this last budget. I know.
Okay, so Bruce, your committee has not been able to meet on that yet?
Wasn't it?
And any upfront questions that you had there at this point?
The question I had was the employee increase. Where did it come from someplace, or is this a new?
the principal clerk that was in the accounting office was transferred mid-year in fiscal 14 to the HR office. In addition, there is a reorganization going on where the person responsible for payroll and benefits that was in the treasurer collector's office is being split between the two offices now as part of a transition into a reorganization.
But you replaced the person, the accounting clerk.
Pardon?
You've replaced that position in the accounting office.
Yes and no. Under my powers of reorganization under the charter, we replaced it with a part-time employee and dropped the consultant that was in Bill's budget.
Does that all add up to a full-time equivalent?
It's a half-time equivalent or less than half-time in the accountant's office, and there is no consultant money in the accountant's office. We're using the money that was appropriated for a consultant in the accountant's office to pay for that individual. And the full-time clerk that was in the accountant's office, who came down to my office for 4 weeks and then passed away.
And the balance of her
God
entire
rest her.
salary was transferred.
Yes.
All right,
No,
this is
I
not an
must say
appropriate
that,
discussion. We don't need to have that
She did a
discussion.
marvelous job for me.
So what is it that you needed another full-time person in your office for? What was the purpose of the moving of that position there?
That the purpose of that position was to establish HR, payroll, and personnel files that are not in existence.
Well, the payroll piece is being taken care of, the half person you're taking from the treasurer.
Yes.
But you've got another full-time person now that's down, that you're looking to have in there.
Well, I'm looking to fill, but yes, that would be to do all of the personnel files and input into the personnel HR module. We have no personnel files. We only have payroll records.
Other questions from the committee?
Yes, please.
Jim?
This was another one of those budgets I was having trouble reconciling with the Bill Rose expense control report. Under the salaries line for fiscal 14 adjustments, Bill Rose control report says that 55,425 is actually 31,567, and the fiscal 14 total budget is, instead of 143,212, is 119,355. Now, the reason I ask this is because I'm looking at kind of the jumps between 14 and 15, and if I look at a jump from 143 to 167 as opposed to 119 to 167, I get a whole different picture of this thing here.
As the HR director indicated, there is going to be a reorganization before this year is out. It was anticipated it would be done by now. It's not done. It is in the process of collective bargaining, but it will be done during fiscal 14, and that money will be transferred and the budget will be adjusted. It will be less than those amounts shown here because the amounts shown here are based on a trigger date, if you will, 2 weeks ago. It's not happened yet, but it will happen this fiscal year.
This fiscal year?
Yes, before July,
When we're in
before June 30.
14 now. Thank you.
Peter, then Pat.
Yeah, all right, Mr. Jamie here wants to take away our awards. Maybe we should zero this item, this whole budget.
All right, can we have, do we have a more responsible comment here, please?
All right.
Jeez, so
Is that my award?
I'm going to not allow any more award talk, okay?
You're going to take half a person from the treasurer's office.
Which he utilizes now anyways. They kind of share that person.
Yeah, but wait a minute. 3 years ago, we were on a subcommittee with her. We gave her an extra person because she was falling behind and getting the tax bills out. That's why they were late.
Well, we restored a position, because 2 years prior to that, we'd cut that full-time
All right, so
bodies.
we gave her a position because
Yeah.
she needed it.
Yep.
How's this going
For
to
the
work out
record,
down
she
there if
doesn't
she's losing
issue
a
tax
person
bills.
half-time?
Those come from the assessor's office.
Pardon?
The treasurer collector does not issue tax bills. They come from the assessor's office.
Well, they do something down there.
They do, they collect the money.
Said it was because of
Yeah.
her, she wasn't getting the tax bills out.
I think a couple years ago, you did not have an HR office. There were functions that are properly human resources functions that were being performed within the treasurer-collector's office. We are, in our reorganizations, moving the people into the proper department.
Okay.
Other questions, Pat?
Just the FTE, so it was 1.4, then you took a full-time person over from accounting to make it 2.4, and then a half a person from treasury, so is that 2.5? Should that be like 2.9 or something?
Actually, the 1.4 represents the portion of the year for the employee that was transferred over.
Okay, because it's a part year, so is
Correct,
2.5
it was
an
part year.
accurate number
And
at the
then
end
the
of the day?
2.5 will be, the plan is that there will be 2 full-time employees, this clerk and the HR director, and then the half-time position that currently exists split between the treasurer collector and the HR director.
It's a transitionary half.
Yeah, I missed the part year. Okay, thank you.
And one last question, where are all these people sitting?
Right around me.
Okay.
Or were.
The clerk that was transferred downstairs is where the receptionist used to be years ago.
Yeah, I
And
saw
that's
that.
where she was until she got ill. And the other position is in the office
This
that
is
she's
already in the
now.
treasurer's office, yeah, okay.
Or actually, it's in the office that is my entranceway to my office.
Right, the vestibule. No, it's the outer office. The outer office. Okay. Any other questions here? All right, moving on. We are at the Building Code Enforcement, Pat, and that's page 31.
We met with the department head, Tom McGrath, and the budget team today. There was an increase in the salary line, and that was basically because the assistant building code enforcement, and I know I'm not giving that title the proper due, was hired at more than it was budgeted for. Let's see, the $4,900 that was zeroed out of data processing and maintenance services, that's the People GIS that I just confirmed earlier went to engineering. And the professional development increased because now we have 2 professional certified people in this department that need to keep up the certification. And the small changes to expenses, Tom basically went and he tried to get a better handle on accurate numbers for each category. So he just shuffled some around. So for the most part, we got satisfactory answers to that. Did you want to say something, Peter? He gave us some good backup documentation that I'll send out as well and we'll put on the website. We got the usual chart that we love to see of all the fees and the permits. So we can see the revenue that was brought into the department. One thing of note, though, that's important to stress is that 2013, he explained, was a bit of an anomaly in terms of the fees that we brought in because we had 70 new single-family homes that we're not going to see again. We're not going to see the IKEA again. So the revenues that we'll see going forward are more on par with 2012, which was in the 320,000 range. So we'll still be seeing revenue, but it just won't be as high as we saw last year. But I'll make sure everybody gets copies of that information. And that's all I have for that.
Questions? Jim?
This sealer of weights and measures, are we still using the state program for that?
Yes, we are.
Thank you.
And we make money.
We actually made a modest amount of money last year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Barbara?
This is ZBA, right?
Building and Code Enforcement, formerly known as the zoning.
The zoning board, right?
Yeah, it was part of the building and zoning.
So what I was curious about is they have a secretary that sits at their meetings, And I was just wondering if you could tell, because we need to hire a secretary, so I'm trying to get some numbers. So I was just curious about how much does that secretary cost that zoning board a year?
I have that information.
Okay, but I don't.
I think he's telling you he'll give it to you.
It's like 2,500.
About 2,500? Okay, thank you.
And just so this committee knows, we are investigating a different way of doing this for some of the committees, where there are some that the minutes are taken and they're almost transcription. And part of that is because of the fact that people ask for transcripts or pay for transcripts if they're going to court. It seems to me it would be more appropriate to record lawyers want transcripts, then they can come to the town, and the town will charge them the money that it costs to furnish the transcript from a transcription service that is in business to take the recording and do the transcript. And we will look at that for all committees.
I would like to say something about that, to add to your thought process. Having gone through zoning board hearings, one of the purposes of that secretary was to also help that volunteer board to know some of those rules and regulations and what needed to be filed in appropriate times and stuff. So sometimes you need a really qualified person who's familiar with those things, not just taking meetings, but actually who knows what's going on. So I would just like to say, and I think people in this room know who I'm talking about, she was amazing when she was with the zoning board. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, we have staff in this department in building and code enforcement, and we actually are looking to the professionals to manage that if there are people coming in asking for zoning questions.
Peter?
It should not be the administrative staff that answers those questions.
Well, again, as we build out a professional staff, but they needed to be very resourceful in the past because we had limited resources.
It would cause a liability to the town.
Then we've been living in a liability for many, many years.
And
so
that's why you've hired professionals to help you.
That's correct. Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, so am I hearing you right? All these, it's all going to be done on a recorder. There's not going to be no hand script at these meetings?
That's what he's looking into it.
I'm looking into it.
So if something happens to the tape, then you have no record whatsoever. We're not at that meeting.
There's fail-safe because it's done. There's fail-safe.
There's backups.
It's done in a number of different areas, and it's done in a number of different state agencies that hold hearings all the time.
Steve?
We're talking about zoning hearings, is this what we're talking about?
Zoning hearings, I don't think so. Is that?
What are we talking about?
Zoning was mentioned.
We were talking about recording secretaries, and we're talking about the building department. I assume we're talking about zoning hearings.
That was your question, Barbara, do you want to, is that what you were asking?
Yes, that's what I
Okay.
And I hear them saying that if a lawyer comes in for a transcript, we're gonna charge them appropriately. How about if a next door neighbor comes in for a transcript? Are they gonna get charged $50 or $100 for a transcript?
I didn't hear the question.
I said, you said that the lawyers would be charged appropriately. Does that mean the neighbors will be charged appropriately too if they want a transcript of what happened at the meeting?
A transcript versus minutes, yes. A transcript's different than minutes. But if someone needs a transcript for whether it's a neighbor or an attorney, they shouldn't be treated differently. You end up going down a very slippery slope that way because a neighbor could be part of a lawsuit.
Okay, I'm going to end the line of questioning here just because we're not doing it. It's something that's being explored. We can talk about it when we get to that point. But
If we're approving minutes, then why do we need transcripts? I'm confused there.
Steve, they're just exploring it, and I don't want to have that discussion here. We need to move on. At the run rate that we're at now, we've covered 7 items out of 23. At 1.5 hours, that puts us at 11:30. So we need to move along. Animal control, Pat, page 32.
We met with the police and the budget team today. There's really not much to discuss here. There's only a $2,000 increase in this department. The only thing really of note, I thought, was that the, let me make sure I have that right, the animal inspector duties are now being done by the animal control officer. So that's really the only change, just a, small dollar amount changes. There's nothing really else to discuss here. I don't
Any other
think.
questions from the board? Yes? Of course.
With the animal control officer, what are the duties and responsibilities of the animal control officer? I'd like to know what they do.
You can start, I'll finish.
Well, among other things, they respond to dead animal calls.
They respond to what?
They respond to dead animal calls.
Yes?
Commonly referred to as roadkill.
I understand.
That's one of their responsibilities. They follow up on when the town clerk sends out notices to individuals who have not licensed their dogs in accordance with the state statute. He also is responsible for the animal shelter, which is where stray animals are kept. There is a misconception, and we get complaints about them a lot. If you have a raccoon or a squirrel in your attic, he does not go and remove that raccoon or squirrel from your attic. That is the responsibility of the homeowner, who must hire a pest control person. But that's pretty much their duties.
What about coyotes?
Loose dog.
The animal.
Well, I thought I said loose, stray animals, I said. That's, yeah. I guess we don't see any stray horses, but yeah, primarily dogs.
All right,
No
so
stray horses
if
running
he is an animal control, I take it, is
Yeah, our person is in fact a male, yes.
all right. Then I think we need to know the common names and the genus and species of the animals that this person will deal with.
Why?
Why?
Yes. Why is that our concern?
I think it's the concern of every single person in this community.
How does it
Because we
change
have
the
to
budget?
we have to know if that person is dealing with dogs, cats,
Right.
parrots, parakeets, animals that might have to be reported to natural heritage. Do we call him? Do we call natural heritage? What do we do?
But that's a job description issue.
Well, that's what I'm asking. That's why I've always wanted to know what these job descriptions are.
How does it affect this budget discussion?
It affects the budget discussion in the fact that, does he deal with cats?
Yes, he does. Well, actually, Humane Society deals with those, I think.
Yes.
So our animal control officer does not deal with cats.
No, he has spare cats. He has stray cats.
Dr. Camacho, I will talk to him and answer, get your question answered and send
Well,
it
I
to you.
already have an answer to that question. The answer to me was, I do not deal with cats. Therefore, I had to deal with the cat at an expense to myself because I didn't want anything to happen to the poor stray animal. Also, though, I would like to mention the roadkill on Plain Street that was there for about 5 days this past week.
The skunk.
The skunk.
Was it reported?
Yeah, it has to be reported. If he does not drive around and look for roadkill. If it's reported to the police officers, they will dispatch him to clean it up.
Well, that's why I'd like to know, for instance, if someone else has a cat and the cat is in the neighborhood It's a domesticated animal, it is friendly, it belongs to someone. We should be able to call the animal control officer.
I've had experience calling the
The other
Humane
thing-
Society who came and trapped the cat
Yeah,
and
usually
brought
the
it to the
Humane
shelter.
Society will
The
do
other
that.
thing is, if you're dealing with dogs, do we have a device where they're able to scan the animal and find out if there's a chip and then locate the owner?
I think the answer is yes, based on the scandal that occurred 3 years ago,
Yeah.
We do.
where we did scan the chip and knew whose dog it was and didn't report it, apparently. Maybe, I'm not sure, but
Yeah,
yes.
no,
I do know
we have
one.
that capability.
Okay, so where's the list of genus and species?
Do
What
you
we
expect
deal
that
with?
list produced here at this meeting?
I did not.
Not at this meeting.
Okay, so, but the
But I
town,
think
the
we
town
need,
human
we
resources
need
director
to
said
know
he'd get
what
that answer for
animals
you.
are
He
appropriate.
said he'd get the answer for
Thank
you.
you.
Moving on. Auxiliary police, page 20.
The auxiliary police, as you can see, has been zeroed out. It's being absorbed into the police budget. There's 4 people that we're dealing with, so we didn't really go into more discussion than that.
Okay.
So it's now in the police budget.
Crossing guards, page, yes, Ed.
29.
Through you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, hang on a second. What was the question here? Why don't we cover that when we get to the police budget, which is coming up?
Question on auxiliary police. I heard it was absorbed into the police budget, which is fine. The problem I haven't seen an auxiliary policeman in several years. Do they exist?
Yes, they do.
There are 4 of them. There are 4 of them.
I don't know, it's not, the town managers have validated that there are 4 existing in the police department.
Are these among the phantom employees that we were talking about last night?
No.
I mean,
Five people.
if you've got 4 people, we should see them somewhere.
Do you see
Yeah,
all the
they're-
police officers in town all the time?
Excuse me?
See every single police officer in town?
No, but I see police officers. I have not seen one auxiliary.
Mr. Kelly?
Auxiliary police are not town employees. They're, by law, they're volunteers.
Unpaid volunteers.
Unpaid volunteers.
Unpaid volunteers.
Yeah, we know that. I know that. But where are they? What do they do? I don't understand. You know, before, a few years back,
Please check-
they were
please
very
check with-
visible. They had uniforms.
Please check with the police, the chief of police for that answer, if you would. It's
Well,
not something that we would
I
have.
shouldn't have to do that. We should have that information because we're going to need it for town meeting. I shouldn't have to go and ask for that.
Please, I'm referring you to the police chief.
Well, I think you should find that out. You're the chairman of the committee, not me.
I am not going to go find out, so.
You don't,
is there
okay, so
anything
you
else
don't
here?
care. Okay, so you don't
It's not a
care.
paid item, it's not a budget item, it's not something that fiscally reflects on this committee. It's a volunteer.
I understand that. They've always been volunteers. Since day one, they've been volunteers. But they were visible and they performed
We need to
services
move
for us.
along, you're out of order, please. Next item, page 26, police.
Again, we met with the budget team and Deputy Chief Devine. One change is the FTE count is 59, not 60. The 4 civilian dispatchers were pulled out of this budget and put into their own budget that we'll get to. There was a little bit of confusion on my part that we did get straightened out. I just want to point out, to make sure that everybody's aware, that the police department as well as the fire department, when you look at the fiscal 14 budget column, that still includes the civilian dispatchers in them, even though we've moved them into another department. So just be aware of that. So what I did is I compared the fiscal 15 budget to what the 14 would have been without them to get a true picture of what the increases were. And basically the increases turned out to be monies for the contract that was settled last year. The superior officers that were settled are due for an increase this year, as well as some, when we bargained out some of the stipends we are paying for those as well this year. There is an increase of $100,000 in the overtime line item. And what we should note there is that it was $300,000 last year, it was $200,000 the year before, but for the last several years, they have been running at $400,000. So if this extra $100,000 is approved, it'll be basically on track with what they've been spending the last several years. I did receive some information from Deputy Chief Devine on the types of overtime, and I'll be, sending that to everyone as well as some information on the shifts so that we understand how the shifts work. He's still below where he'd like to be in terms of, manning at the state level versus the government, the Fed level. What else? There were other small changes. Jim, you had asked about the auxiliary police. If you see under the ammunition line item, you'll see some of the expenses rolled into there because the auxiliary police still needed ammo for the training. So that will be in that line item. The clothing and uniform is in the clothing and uniform item. And what's the other one? So those were rolled in. We made sure of that. There's really not much else to. I did ask for again to get a list of the actual people, so I could verify that the X people, so that we know that we have a right body count and the right people. Oh, and there are 2 vacancies in the department right now, and there will be a 3rd, but they're actively looking into trying to get those positions filled.
Are those retirements or?
2 retirements and 1
Lateral.
leaving.
Lateral transfer out.
Leaving the department and transferring out to another department?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
And we also have some long-term injuries.
Yeah.
That might, even though the 111F, we're treating them similar to how we're resolving the workers' comp issues.
And one of the vacancies is an individual who did not successfully complete probation.
Okay. Bruce, then Jim?
The overtime, didn't we brought on some new officers this year under the impression that the overtime would be lessened? So we're going back to fiscal 13 actuals for the overtime line. It just doesn't seem like overtime is being controlled. And can I ask my second question now?
Sure.
The $20,000 departmental community events, what is that?
That is police activity and parades, primarily directing traffic.
So why is that not part of overtime?
Because we asked the chief to break it out separately.
Okay. But to the overtime question,
I would say this administration did not promise that it would save overtime costs. It may have been the chief's promise. If you take a look at the trend now for 3 years has been $400,000 a year. That's what they're spending, regardless of what's budgeted. As I indicated in a meeting we had earlier this year, the door's left open for them to come back. So it's very difficult to hold them to their budget unless we properly fund it and make it clear to them that they are not to exceed budget, which is why we went to 400,000. And when we met with Pat today, we basically asked Pat to make sure the door got closed.
But there's no way to go back to you folks for additional funding.
But I mean, the reality, Bruce, is 400K is what he's been spending. Now, I can say we're going to try to address some of that by, and she's not gotten to that yet, but part of the purpose behind going to civilian dispatching is to put more uniforms on the street that are now currently involved in other activities. For example, virtually every shift, there's a police officer on overtime dispatching at time and a half because of not having enough manning. We have somebody who spends more than half their time doing firearm licenses. Therefore, that uniform's not available on the street. Some of the changes in the civilian dispatching are designed to get at least 1.5 more bodies on the street, which we think will address some of the overtime. There have been some changes in the contract that Mr. Kelly voted with the superior officers, who are primarily sergeants and lieutenants and captains, that we think will also have an impact positively on the overtime budget.
And if it carries over into our other negotiations, it will have further positive impact.
I'm not sure. I didn't think so, but.
There are basically 3 line items in the auxiliary police budget. When I chase those line items into the police budget, I see what should be minimal kind of increases in the equivalent budget turn out to be major increases in the equivalent budgets. Ammunition, for instance, $2,600 went up to something on the order of about $7,000. Is there, can you clarify that for me?
Ammunition, anybody who shoots
Oh, I understand what it's
will
used
know,
for, yes.
will know that ammunition has gone up considerably, the cost of ammunition.
Since
And that's what's reflected in this as well as the transfer in.
They're shooting twice a year.
Yeah, our officers are required to certify twice a year.
I understand that. I understand that. Now, you know, but that's been going on for a couple of years now, that certification. I'm just seeing just the equivalent ammunition in the auxiliary police was $2,600. In the police budget now, the police budget has gone up from fiscal 14 to 15, $7,000. Uniform clothing, when I look at $1,063, I look at an increase of about $13,000 in the police budget. I'm just seeing major increases in the police budget for what seem minor separations from the auxiliary police.
It's not just for the auxiliary force. The ammunition costs we are estimating will go up that much. And if the federal government stops stockpiling the ammunition themselves, maybe we'll be able to get a reduced cost.
Right. Like, for example, Homeland Security has bought like 1.2 billion rounds and it's created a shortage of ammunition. So the price of ammunition has gone through
As
the roof.
Pat pointed out also, Jim, there are 3 vacancies, or will be 3 vacancies. Each one of those officers has to be outfitted with uniforms, so that's a cost in there. And each one of them has to be outfitted with a bulletproof vest, which is a cost in that line item for clothing and uniforms.
Good, thank you.
And it is contractual,
Yes.
so we didn't have, too much of a discussion since it is contractual, that it's just not one of those things we can do anything about.
Yep. Scott?
Good. You're not finished yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Jim?
Sorry. Just to follow up on Bruce's question, when I look at Bill Rowe's expense control report, I see that the overtime is 91% expended to this point of the year. Thank you.
Scott?
Just to help Mr. Guerin understand the cost of ammo, 1 box of ammo that I purchased the other day was $62 for 20 rounds.
What did it cost last year?
31.
It's double.
Double. And like I said, you can thank
you guys are
thank the guys at the federal level. They're
better
going
than
to
buying
give
gold.
you guns, but they're going to make the ammo 10,000.
So let me just ask this quick question on uniforms. The vest that the officer has that's leaving the department, transferring out, whatever, what happens to that? Why do we got to buy a new one for his replacement? Her replacement?
In order for the vest to be effective, it has to fit exactly, and each vest is sort of quasi-customly made. I mean, they do come in sizes, but they do have to fit.
And they can't be refitted, or
Typically, you give them a new vest.
what happens to the old ones? You let them take them?
I assume the old ones are probably recycled somehow. I can check that out. I don't really know the answer to that question.
And you do know the shelf life is very small, 5 years at the most.
Well, how long ago did we buy vests? Wasn't it 3 years ago?
I believe that Deputy Chief Devine said it was 2 years ago that we replaced all the vests in the department in a standalone item.
Okay. And the animal control expenses in this budget, why aren't they in the animal control department?
Now that's a misnomer. We're going to change that. Pat picked up on that today. These are really the feeding and care of our police dogs, of which we have 2. These should be canine expenses.
Oh, the canine officers.
Yeah. So that's a misnomer. It shouldn't be animal control.
I did want to add that I asked about grants because I know there are some positions paid for by grants and they just haven't shown the grants in this budget yet, but they're planning on doing that because we have to be aware of positions that are covered by grants if we no longer get the grants because we can't just do away with the position. So it's just this line, this department doesn't show grants in whereas others do already.
Is there any accounting of the money that the police department recovers and expends? Is there a separate ledger for all of that?
When you say recovers, what do you mean? You mean like on drug forfeiture?
Correct.
That is accounted for. Every penny of it, every expense has to be pre-approved at a level outside of the community because it can only be spent on certain things.
To correct, its base salary is not eligible for to pay that out of the grants. There is some overtime and some stipends, I believe, that can be paid out of the grants.
So back to our discussion here, as approved by entities outside of the town.
Typically, they go through the they get their money through the attorney, the state's attorney,
right?
And they have to indicate to the state's attorney what they're going to spend it on. And then Bill Rowe has to account for it separately because it has to be reported then to the feds. Because what we get is I don't know, you have a $2 million drug bust, we might see $20,000 because we're at the bottom of the food chain. So it is accounted for, and it is accounted for separately. Bill has those records; they're public records.
But as our chief executive officer, you don't have any say in how that's money spent.
I have to sign off when they spend it, but typically it cannot be spent for any operational expense. It cannot displace any budget item.
So you can't buy a car with it?
You could buy an undercover car that you're going to use for drug busts, frankly. That you can do.
But not a cruiser.
But not a cruiser.
And you couldn't buy one for administrative staff?
No. You're not allowed to do that. That would be considered displacement of regular budget.
So there's a separate schedule that's kept on all this accounting?
Yes, there is. There has to be by federal law.
Can we get a copy of that?
I'll ask Bill.
Thank you.
Get you one.
You can buy a microwave that's really a camera.
You can buy a lot of fancy equipment with it, but
which was the intent. I mean, you know, absolutely put it back to use.
But you can't. It can't be. Some towns, for example, use it to buy these armored cars. You know, for SWAT teams, that sort of thing. You also can use it for specialized training. That's not part of your regular training, and I know he has used some forfeiture money in the time I've been here for specialized training.
Okay. Most departments do that.
All right. Any other questions? Hearing none, moving on. Police crossing guards, Pat, page 27.
The crossing guards, I was a little confused. I asked to get a little bit more information on this one. I was having a really hard time. This is a case where the .38 FTE is just a meaningless number. There were roughly 19 crossing guards, one of which is a supervisor. So it's really the bodies.
Pretty highly paid .3 person, huh?
That's what my concern was, how you can get .38 of a person with 97,401, because I want that job.
Because it's 30 of them.
But, so we were going over some numbers and how many hours, and I just wasn't sure yet, so Susan was going to look into that a little closer.
And we took this straight from the school budget.
Straight out of the budget, they had it at .38 in this number.
And we will go over it with Joel Harding.
And get me the information. Plus, I did notice, because I went back and I looked at the school budgets myself, because I like to tie the loose ends, and it looks like this is still in the school's budget. So I passed that information on to Barbara, so when she meets with the schools, she will verify, and if it's there, then obviously that will be zeroed out.
Okay.
Because we're not going to leave it in.
Covering her bases in case the town meeting said no.
Which is valid, but we don't want to leave it more places.
And right now, we've had discussions, the superintendent and we have had discussions because of the safety concern because of South Coast Rail, and we are looking at these crossing guards as being very important right now because of the grade crossings and the fact that a number of the children use the rail bed to walk to school.
And home.
And home. Excellent points. Steve Mitchell?
I'm not sure if you know what you're getting yourself into here. I've lived across the street from the West School for over 60 years, and up until about 5 years ago, everything was beautiful, and it's public safety. That and the Hanson School, town manager, the Board of Selectmen, and the police chief really need to start doing something because kids are going to get hurt. More kids are going to get hurt and maybe killed in those two schools at least because of the situation is there. The crossing guard used to be able to easily cross all the kids there. It's a disaster now. So at least in the afternoon.
Actually, that's why we're moving it into under the jurisdiction of the police department, because legally, unless it's not under the if it's not under the jurisdiction of the police department, crossing guards are legally not allowed to direct traffic.
I understand. I believe it belongs there. I'm just saying that in the last few years, it's become a real. Parents are parking on Central Street. They never were before, and that just opens the door for people to get hurt and killed. So something's got to be done.
So, Steve, you're asking for more for staffing there, right? That's not there today, or?
No, I think they're putting the crossing guards in jeopardy because it used to be an easy job to cross the kids there. Now they cannot control them anymore. They've got to find other ways to getting the kids to the parents, not just crossing the street and just letting them get in the car somewhere.
Because of the increase in traffic and
it's a disaster.
Decrease in buses.
They cut the buses down and the whole bit, and
we'll
it's
let Chief
not safe.
Chastity know.
Right. And we also have, we had some monies appropriated legislatively to be able to do analysis of that whole area to come up with recommendations to the town to address that particular area and others in town that are at risk. So it'd be good to kind of get an update on that at some point.
Actually, we missed our opportunity when we sent Mark
With
home.
Mark, yeah. I know.
He's been heading up that whole thing.
Yep. Okay. Well, maybe on the side, if you could kind of give us just a paragraph or two update on what's going on.
We'll see what we can do.
Great, thank you. All set, Pat?
Yes.
Okay. Civilian dispatch, page 28.
As we said before, the civilian dispatches, we're removing 4 from the fire budget, and we're removing 4 from the police budget. The whole goal, as people have said, is to, you know, put the officers where they're best needed rather than answering dispatch calls. So it really is a combination of funding from those 2 departments. There are 3 vacancies, however, that they're working on filling, and the reason you see the 8.19 FTEs is obviously 4 from police, 4 from fire. The 0.19 is to cover some per diem civilian dispatches to cover when someone is out. That way you're not taking an officer and putting them on dispatch. This is straight salary only for those 8 dispatchers. The supervisory functions relating to it, as well as the training, is still in the police budget.
And If overtime's needed for this particular budget, it's got to come out of the police overtime budget.
Presumably, I mean, if the per diem doesn't cover it, then it would have to
Per
come from
diem
the...
doesn't cover it, yes.
Right.
And it would not be an officer called in, it would be a dispatcher.
You have a source of those that you can just call in, or?
No, I mean, we'd be calling one of the 8.
Off duty, off schedule, okay.
Because what they're doing now is calling it off
I think part of the challenge way back when was that there had to be an officer staff there for people walking in off the street, et cetera. So economy of scale, cutbacks in budgets and things of that nature is how that evolved. So now it's good that we're getting that squared away in definition of duties. And
Yeah, because you were paying someone time and a half to sit and doing dispatch duty.
we know the police department had gotten extremely good at accounting for their overtime over the last couple of years, so, and we truly appreciate that.
I have a question.
Joe, and then Chief.
If you call in a civilian dispatcher because one called in sick, is that overtime for that dispatcher, or
Yeah,
is it
if
straight
it's the
time?
per diem dispatcher, no, it's straight time.
Straight
If
time.
it's a regular dispatcher, it is time and a half, but time and a half for a regular dispatcher pretty much is less than what regular straight time would be for a police officer.
And it would be after 80 hours on a 2-week period.
I'm sorry, how many hours?
80 hours on a 2-week period.
So you wouldn't pay overtime until the 81st hour.
So all of these monies would have to be encumbered for the whole year, just to cover salaries in these areas. If they end up exceeding salaries, how does it get paid for? I know we're talking about paying them per diem people, but that's an additional cost?
Yeah, under the charter, there can be a transfer.
Oh, from this committee? Or from?
From the police. That's from the police.
Well, the per diem money is in this budget. So you're saying if we need to...
Go beyond the per diem, you're saying?
I'm just saying that if we go over this budget, how are we paying for it?
Police, right?
The short answer is that's Paul Chastity's problem.
Police.
Quite frankly.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you very much.
Also, the civilian supervisors, the program administrator 1 and program administrator 2, are going to be trained dispatchers also.
Right. And they are in the police budget.
So the strategy, which I think is a good strategy personally, is to kind of carve out a civilian group within the police department that are non-police officer people. So the dispatchers, people are doing background checks for the gun licensing, which eats up an enormous amount of time because there's a large increase in demand for gun licenses these days. Some of the computer responsibilities that
Correct.
person are being all folded into a person who will now oversee, and that would include the crossing guards as well, I believe, right?
Correct.
That is correct.
So now you've kind of got a civilian community being headed up by one person. I believe that that's the second addition to staff, if you'll, so to speak. Even though they're showing a reduction of staff of 3 FTEs in their department, there really is an additional person being staffed that previously had not been.
That is correct. And,
Okay.
and that person, by job description, will report either to the chief or the deputy chief.
Right.
That will be the chain of command.
Okay.
We anticipate that this will create a minimum of 1.5 FTEs, for want of a better way of putting it, in blue uniforms that we can put back on the street.
Which is a good thing. Jim?
I got
Oh, sorry. David?
a question on the clothing and uniforms. Is that Chief Chastity's problem too? Is that his budget? Okay.
Developed this budget. It was a joint effort between him and Mark Dolph and the budget team, and he signed off on it. So again, it is his problem because he's assuming the responsibility, and he has assured us he will make it work.
I did talk to Chief Dolph about this.
And we do not have to then hear Chief Dolph complaining that Paul Shastany has stolen another trained dispatcher from him.
Yeah, I heard the story. I know what you're saying. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Jim, and then Ed?
Just a clarification for me. The civilian dispatchers that are in this public safety budget, was that extracted from the police department and the fire department only?
Yes.
Because when I add up the civilian dispatches from those two budgets that are in Bill Rowe's expense control report, I come up with a number like $240,000, $250,000 rather than the $330 that's here.
Susan will take that one.
Part of the fire dispatchers are coming from ambulance. That split of dispatcher
also the
salaries
ambulance.
for the fire department has been 62% in the ambulance enterprise and 38% in the fire budget. So you need to look at 3 budgets in order to reconcile this number to those budgets.
I missed the ambulance account, thank you.
And also, we've been plagued with vacancies where we fill one and we lose one, and we fill one and we lose one in the dispatch services in the 2 departments.
And if a police officer were called in on overtime to do dispatch, it would not hit that budget. It would hit the police budget. Yes.
And it looks like an average, if you just divided it out by the FTE, it's about 42,000 or change for per position, which is somewhat less, slightly less than what we start an officer at.
Rick?
Substantially less than an officer.
I just want to respond, Jim. I did take the dollars. I did follow the dollars from all 3 departments. I took the 2014, took the dispatches. and there's actually more in this budget, and it's because of the per diems. So I just...
Jim, I'm satisfied that Pat now knows more about their budget than they do. So,
I guess one more point we would make is that the police and fire dispatchers now are not cross-trained. So there will be a training component that Chief Shastany has also acknowledged he has to take on. That's unique training for both types of dispatching.
Yeah.
And then there's unique training for medical dispatching. So we will be training police dispatchers to do fire and fire dispatchers to do police.
The apples and oranges, they have to make them all
right.
Fruit salad.
Yeah.
We'll throw in a couple of grapes.
Yeah, so that's a lot of training. It's a lot of work, and so the real challenge is when you lose one. You know, they're highly trained folks, and so.
And he seems convinced, frankly, that he can get a grant for training.
Oh, great, good.
We'll see.
Our real problem's the one we've talked about and we face in a number of different areas. We train them.
Succession plan.
We train them, and then they, Sharon, Easton, et cetera, offers them $2 to $3 more an hour. Yep. So we might be back next year to address.
Well, you know, if you can
that in
quantify
certain
the
areas.
cost.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will be.
Right. Yep, we deal with facts and data.
You know I love comp figures.
Right. We have to combine them first. We'll be back at a later date to go over the costs.
Thank you. Cynthia Welch?
Cynthia Walsh, 1096 Park Street. I think this is a good idea. I've had a lot of experience calling 911 for help. And as it is now, you get the dispatcher at the police station. You have to tell him what your problem is, or her. And then if you need an ambulance or medical, they switch you over to the fire department. Now, I'm sure somewhere somebody says that takes 10 seconds. But if you're having a heart attack, it seems a lot longer. And it bothered me that I had to tell a police officer my medical problem and then repeat it. This way, it's a one-stop shop. You make the call, you clutch your chest, and you wait for help.
Yep. Yeah, it seemed to make a ton of sense. Logistically, obviously a lot of work to be done here, and the training, the cross-training is a big hill to climb, so. But excellent point. Any other questions here? All right.
The thing I'd add, Rick, is that there isn't a capital article that accompanies this. If in fact the capital article does not pass, we cannot do the civilian, the joint dispatch.
Right.
And just as I think I said this last night, all but $10,000 of that capital article will be able to move should we relocate the police station at a later date.
Right.
And the $10,000 is a minor change to the building.
And in the process, not only will we get the functionality on one location, but there'll be some increase in functionality and capability of the equipment. Okay.
Which is mandated by the state.
It always is.
Of course.
Are they funding it, by the way? Are they
Of
paying
course
for
not.
it?
Oh, and incidentally...
David, do you see any money coming in for that?
No, I won't get it.
Thank you. Jeez, it kind of just rolls off our tongues now like it's okay. Mandated by the state. Okay. Let me see, civilian, Board of Health, Jim, page 39.
The Board of Health was one of 4 departments. I didn't receive any response to my questions.
That's because they're morphing.
So I'll ask them here.
A lot of morphing going on.
Yes, I think so.
The employees...
Better than
The increase in employees from FY14 to FY15, has that taken place yet?
Yes. If you go to the health department, there are now 3 full-time employees down there.
When I look at Bill Rowe's adjusted budget, in the human services budget for health department right now, it says that the fiscal year total budget is $143,000. According to Bill Rose, it's $89,675. Does Bill know that this employee is there?
Again, this is a reorganization.
They're with the auxiliary police.
Pardon?
They're with the auxiliary police.
Yeah.
We've just hired the assistant town sanitarian, and we've just implemented the transfer of the program administrator.
Right. The assistant sanitarian started approximately 2 weeks ago, and that is the point in time at which we also transferred the individual from up here downstairs.
Bingo.
And part of the reason that it took so long was we had to make sure there was space available to actually seat people.
Jim, the other thing to note was town meeting last year, as you probably recall, authorized us to fund that assistant sanitarian out of the revolving fund. So you'll only see the salaries for the administrator too and the sanitarian there, and then the salary for the assistant comes out of the revolving.
I didn't know what the third employee was for. Okay,
Yeah,
that's all right.
the third employee is an assistant sanitarian who is funded out of the
Right.
revolving fund.
Which town meeting approved last year.
Yeah, I can't see that in
Correct.
the current line items here. There is a new item, vehicle expense, $1,400. That's never shown up before in the budget. What's that about?
The vehicle that was being used by the department lost its floor. I think is the best way to describe it, and so they're using their own vehicle.
They're using their own vehicles, and until we begin to do replacements in our fleet, that we don't have cars to give them. They're not the only ones in that condition. The engineering department's also in that condition.
Well, this car looks like Fred Flintstone's car. There is no floor.
So it serves a purpose having no floor, they can stop.
Yeah. So they're now getting
It's
mileage.
not safe.
I think the federal rate is 53.5 cents a mile. They're using their own cars to do inspections.
Are you using, so the assessors have needs, the engineer has, there's a lot of different departments that have spot needs for these things. Is there a carpool being discussed, or?
We don't have a
Having a-
carpool now. We will probably propose one. We forwarded you a copy of the vehicle policy the board adopted. The board is also considering committing to becoming a green community. If and when we become a green community, we
Go to
will,
bikes?
we will be going to more fuel-efficient cars. The exceptions to fuel-efficient cars are police cars, heavy equipment, which would include the heavy fire vehicles. So I think next year you will probably see an article requesting replacement of all the inspection vehicles, probably with vehicles comparable to the ones you purchased last year for the fire department.
Okay, so the change in process is that we're going to trade our current vehicles for new vehicles, so there's no more hand-me-downs?
Correct.
Okay. And now you're going to be looking for...
I would say that the policy also puts a life on each car. So for example, the life on an inspection vehicle is 8 years, whereas the life on a police vehicle is 3 years. The life on fire equipment, as the former chief can tell you, can easily be 20 years.
Yep. John Rock.
So what happens to the police vehicles after 3 years? I thought they were given to other town. They what? They're traded in?
The new policy requires that they be traded. Traditionally, we have handed down vehicles. We are at a place now where we do not have any vehicles that are highway worthy. They cannot even be driven on Route 24.
Now, part of that reason is that the police department saved up the appropriations from the last couple of years. They haven't bought any cars. So they're just about to procure new vehicles in the new coming year.
We have one car that, as like Jamie said, it has no floor. We have another car that every time it rains, there's 3 inches of water on the floor.
I take your word for it. I just thought when they were retired, they went to other town departments. But you're saying they're traded in. So.
No, that's the new policy.
Right.
The old policy that it replaced was that they're traded, they go down, which is why we have a fleet that's aging and literally falling apart or rusting apart.
That's why he's saying that there's no more hand-me-downs.
cannibalizes one to put another one on the road.
Which is why they end up behind the armory, because the motor's been removed or the transmission's been removed. And we will be doing, Scott will enjoy this, we will be doing an auction this spring to get rid of the surplus junk.
I understand the one at the Council on Aging is an auction in place.
Yes, it will be auctioned in place because it cannot move. That one will have to be towed away or cut up and carted off.
Possibly the new license that the selectman issued the other night might be of assistance there. Scott?
I'm glad to see that the town manager has a new policy, because I sat in the board and we voted a policy. Now, I don't know if these policies are kept in a booklet and anybody can research them, because I was given one once that said, these are the policies of the Board of Selectmen. And the Board of Selectmen voted at that time, trade it, auction it, or junk it. And it never, ever happens in this town. Can you tell me why? Because the biggest thing is we're going to get another backhoe, and we got 3. And then I'm going to hear, I just couldn't let it go, and it's going to drive down the street just as pissed as it was the other day.
Well,
So what I think is got to go on in this place is trade it, junk it, or auction it.
And in essence, Scott, the policy that the board apparently readopted says that. The change is that it puts out different classes of equipment and establishes life cycles to those equipment. And one of the things we may be going to in the long run is we may consider going to a fleet manager, and that would be the fleet manager's responsibility. When you hit the magic number, whatever it is, for an inspector, it would be 8 years or 120,000 miles. That car's gone.
I mean, I work in a lot of towns, and you go to different towns, and the first thing they say is, oh, you're from Stoughton? Boy, they got a lot of equipment.
Well,
all I hear.
Well,
and that may be true for Public Works. I can't attest to that. I can tell you that we have a lot of junk when it comes to this building.
I've said this before, I'll say it again. There is a new cadre of professionals in place here. We will make sure that the change happens.
Well, actually, the Board of Selectmen policies are part of the town code, so if you went on the website, the town clerk's office right now, you'd see their policies and procedures, so, and we have an internal auditor who's going to hold them accountable, so. Moving on. Board of Health, Conservation, Bruce, anything there? Or deferring? It's page 19, by the way, sorry. Shouldn't we bring back Joe Flynn for this one, or? Anybody have any questions on this one? I don't have anything specific. Okay.
Why the change in
Oh, Jim?
The new line item for phones, are those landlines, or those, what are they? We coming in,
The cell phone, isn't it?
Probably a satellite phone.
we coming into the 21st century
When you're out of the
here?
bird sanctuary.
Probably a cell phone, right? It's a cell phone.
It's a cell phone.
Yeah. cell phone.
Okay.
And the open space field trail maintenance, new item, $2,500, this new strategy,
Actually, the request was more than that. I cut it to 2,500 in the inaugural year, but yes, we have several trailheads that need to be spruced up. We have more trailheads than we have potential Eagle Scouts. So, we would like to begin to do some of these projects. The Conservation Commission chose to put this in their budget. We did cut it back modestly, but we do have trailheads that need to be cleaned up and marked.
Thank you.
Bruce?
Why doesn't
19.
that line fall under the Parks Department?
Because this is conservation land, and under the statute, care and control of conservation land rests with the Conservation Commission. So it's not technically a park in the whole way of how towns own land. Conservation land is a unique holding, and it's subject to very unique rules.
Is there any option for support from CPC for this?
They can, in fact, make application, but whether or not typically I think what they've done instead is gone to CPC for things like purchasing land, so they can maintain open space, as opposed to sprucing up existing conservation
Of course, the law has changed now that allows us to.
Right, they're allowed to do
Right,
that.
for the land we didn't acquire.
Correct.
Yeah, for open space, so we should see what's available there. Yes, Mrs. Anzavino?
I thought Conservation had a revolving fund. Can't they take the money out of their own revolving fund?
You would have to change the purpose of the revolving fund at town meeting. I believe that trail maintenance is not part of that purpose.
So what is the purpose of their revolving fund?
If you have last year's book, it's in last year's book. It lays out what the purposes of that
Well,
revolving.
I was just curious because they were going to use that money to try to clean up Ames Pond, and that seemed like an appropriate fund. So I don't understand why the trails wouldn't be in it. But I guess I'll just have to ask somebody in
it can be
Conservation.
if it's specified, and it's simple enough to change that at town meeting. It's a little late now, the warrant's closed, but it can be changed at a subsequent town meeting.
Okay.
And be taken out of the fund.
Repurpose the fund, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I kind of thought that's what it was for.
there's
so.
nothing that
Thanks.
prevents that.
Okay.
Okay.
Could you just tell me what the salary increase is? There's a slight change in FTEs, and it's about a $5,000 salary increase.
Do you want to cover that? Yeah, those are meeting wages. They're really,
There is one individual that does multiple committees down.
and when,
And office.
and office work, and that person is kind of split around, and when Mark Tisdale took over as town engineer, he looked at the split and realigned the split in accordance with the hours the person actually works for various boards and commissions. So
Okay.
that's part of the change.
It's just a shift, because I know that was
Yeah.
split among 3 or
Correct.
4.
And it's an individual who's there during the day also to do work for the departments.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you've ever been down there, she sits kind of in the back to the left as you come in the door.
All right, moving on to planning on page 18. So the employees here are the town planner?
Correct.
And
Well,
that,
and the meeting wages, that 1
And
at
admin.
2.24.
yes, that engineering suite individual,
We're buying another cell phone for them now?
yes.
The reduction in FTEs is that the economic development specialist was moved into the manager's office under a reorganization plan.
You said into the town manager's budget?
Yes.
Yes.
Direct report to the
It'll be a
town
direct
manager.
report to the town manager. Actually, it was always planned that way. It just
Yeah.
was, it was always planned as a direct report to the town manager. It's just that it was initially located in the planning budget. We moved it to the manager's budget.
It's been advertised, and actually, the committee, Mr. Batchelder, Noreen, and myself are going to be going over the resumes next week.
There will be an appointment before the year's over.
Bruce and Jim?
Consultant fees. They were budgeted for $35,000 in fiscal 14. And I remember didn't we approve some extra money somewhere along the line for more? The consultant fees in this, but I don't understand.
Well, the consultant fee, the $35,000 was for rewriting the zoning bylaw, and that money has now been encumbered because the project has started. The $60,000 includes completing the writing of the zoning bylaw, plus some additional work, as I understand it, that needs to be done on the master plan. There is, as you've probably heard if you watch selectmen's meetings or planning board meetings, the bylaws are outdated and needs to be updated. And it is going to be rewritten and then presented to a town meeting, probably the town meeting in 15 or 16.
So the zoning bylaws that are that's not something that falls under the clerk's domain. This falls under building and zoning,
No,
right?
planning,
Yes, it falls under planning.
It falls under planning?
separate department.
Is that, how does it, okay, but so, once that's completed this year, would we see?
It will not be completed this year, Bruce. It will start this year, and that's the 35,000. It will be completed next year.
That's the 60.
That's why that budget number is, that $60,000 is partially for completion of the zoning rewrite and partially for some additional work on to finish the master plan.
Okay.
Other questions? Jim?
Yep, data processing and maintenance service, $6,000 last year. It's been eliminated from the budget this year.
That's part of the RICO contract, isn't it?
What?
The data processing has been removed.
Yeah, I think it's the RICO contract.
Yeah, that's now in the purchasing. You looked at that one last night. It's under centralized purchasing now.
That the average cost per unit was about $5,800.
Yeah.
This is another one of those budgets that when I look at Bill Rowe's expense controls, I can't find two numbers that match on the two sheets, so I won't, I'm not going to ask any questions regarding the two. Thank you.
Susan wants to answer that. She
Give
feels
us a
obligated.
year to catch up.
She can't let that one go, Jim.
Because the upload was from Bill Rowe's expense control reports. The fiscal, yes.
Yeah.
Fiscal
But
14.
like she said, you have to remember, there are two different snapshots in time. They're simply a snapshot of a particular day and time.
Well, then you were facing in a different direction. I gotta
It could
tell you
be.
that.
It could be.
You may find differences in if you looked at the fiscal 13 official records because some of the line items change. I couldn't upload that cut and paste. I had to do that manually because I had to follow the exact line items to make sure they...
God bless you.
Remember, according to the charter, we have to prepare this so much earlier than some of the reports that you're getting.
These budgets were prepared in November. Pretty much during Thanksgiving week is when we began. Because the budget was required to go to the selectmen before December 31st, and it actually went to them 3 days later.
Original budget numbers to be the same, even at that, but I don't find that.
Oh, she's got to answer that one too. You and Sue should go off to the side and have a conversation.
Oh, this is Ms. Welch?
I just want to say my money's on Sue.
You're going to have to hold the class.
If there's a consultation at the head of a set of stairs, the person who pushes first gets the desired effect. First, some good news. My colleague has located the Conservation Committee's revolving fund, and annual trail maintenance is one of the items. And now my question, and it may have been answered and I just wasn't listening properly. Where is the full-time economic development coordinator?
In the town manager's office.
Oh, well, I did look there and it just says it goes from 5 to 5, so it wasn't very helpful. Thank you.
All set? Ed?
On these adjustments, how come these consultants are having such these big adjustment numbers for the fees? This one here, 73,000 you adjusted on the planning board, and the town council was 180,000. What is going on with all that stuff?
I believe this number is the department researched this number, and the department keeps their own purchase order records. And I think what came out of that research is these were encumbrances that may not have rolled over to the current year properly, which some departments did find, and that's why you see this large a number.
Yeah, but is this money that's going to be spent, or it's just been encumbered, or are we going to get it back as free cash, or we have an idea what's going to happen to it?
That most of it's coming, most of these kinds of situations are being liquidated and will go into free cash. This particular one, I'm not quite sure. The department may in fact be able to use this for upcoming projects and things. So it's in the master planning. It's not clear whether this is going to be liquidated. Quite honestly, this was a November number, from running the official records the day of the day I uploaded it. So I don't know what the adjustment is currently. I tend to run the reports quite a lot, but I can't tell you from memory what this number is right now.
Going forward, are these adjustments going to go away for 15, or are we going to have more of these from 14 to 15, or?
Some of them will go away because we will be extinguishing purchase orders or encumbrances quicker than we have in the past. Some of them won't go away because they're legitimate budget adjustments. So, for example, if there's a reorganization plan that involves moving a function from one department to another, there would be a budget adjustment of a minus number on one department and a plus number on the other to account for that. But for the most part, it's on, it's just burned out. For the most part, we hope that these will go away. We know they're confusing. It's come up probably 10 times tonight.
Well, it's our hope with the finance cabinet to develop the policy where, as was said, early in the fiscal year, as many as possible, if not all, are closed out. And it would only be then the reorganizations or the reapplications of funding that we would see in the adjustment columns.
And this particular one you're talking about in this budget, it involves the master plan, and
Sorry,
that's still a process.
It's very hard to hear up here, so if there's chatter.
Just so, I mean, think about this, because I've given this quite a bit of thought. The really positive thing that came out of this is it made department managers much more aware of the encumbrance process and what it actually means at year end. And as I said before, several of them were conscientious about going through their list of open POs. But as Mike tightens up the policy and you have more awareness on the department level, you will have, I think, what was in the budget presentation as, quote, a tendency to keep carrying over money, which doesn't serve the town that well.
Yeah, we are trying to get a handle on this.
Okay, moving on. Planning, we've done engineering, going to townhouse, page 11. Any questions from the subcommittee here?
The salary going down and the employees going up, and that's due to the restructuring of the janitor?
Restructuring of the facility function.
Yeah, we are eliminating a full-time janitor's position. We're bringing in a full-time facilities position. We will have a part-time handyman, maintenance man, who is an employee who is currently now the building supervisor. We will be taking the two part-time janitors, excuse me, and combining those into one full-time position working nights that will be available to any building, which is not currently the case now.
And just to make sure, because I'm sure there's anybody, if they're still watching, understands, there is going to be provisions to make sure that there is someone to close the library.
I guess the other thing that you're seeing here, Bruce, is that we have done a poor job of maintaining our buildings. We have under-budgeted building maintenance. We are anticipating with the new building, with the new facilities manager, that more building and more routine building maintenance will in fact take place, and that is why the line item for building equipment, supplies, and repairs has gone up. It's almost tripled.
And that's for this building?
Well, no, this is going to be a central budget. That is for any town building. The facilities manager will be responsible for all the buildings we own, including the pump stations, the physical plant, not the pump part that belongs to DPW, but the actual envelope, for want of a better way of putting it, will belong to the facilities manager. It will be his or her responsibility to see to it that everything that needs to be done is done on a timely basis.
John?
Can we change the name of the department?
Yes,
I mean,
you
it's
can.
a little confusing.
Yes, you can. Again, we stuck with the name. It's been called Townhouse probably for years.
Maybe facilities or facilities maintenance or something like that.
Right. We are not opposed to that at all.
Yep, Barbara, and then...
So you said you're eliminating a janitor. Is he being laid off, or is it a retirement? Is he getting...
He has retired. He's been gone for some time now.
Okay, thanks.
Roberta?
Yes, please, thank you, Mr. Hill. On the sheet that we were given that gives the, it was given by HR, I guess, regarding all the different positions and where they were on the grid. So we have the new facilities manager, a building maintenance coordinator. Is that the person who's a .49? Is that the person who's referred to as a handyman?
Yes.
So it says retire limited.
Yes.
What does that mean?
We have some individuals that work for the town that are public sector retirees, and as such, they're limited to the number of hours and the amount of money they're allowed to make from a public sector job.
I understand that.
The person who occupies this position, the building maintenance or handyman that I refer to, is in fact a public retiree and
All right.
is limited in the number of hours that he can work in a week.
So is his work divided so that he's able to make the max on half a year, and then you can make the other max on the other half of the year?
He's only allowed to work.
Calendar year.
Yes,
Yeah, they look, yeah, the
We're bu-
retirement boards, go ahead.
We're budgeting in such a way that we're looking at it over the long term, so he would not be able to maximize in 2 years and then not work for a year.
In other words, if he works from July, well, for the fiscal year, July 1st to
We're looking at
July 1st to December, whatever it is, 31st, all right? That takes care of him, and he can make the max of what he's allowed
Correct.
to.
I understand, we're not letting the clock be reset.
Are you letting that happen?
We're not letting the clock reset.
No, that's-
And then he worked for a year and then he's off for
No,
a year.
the plan-
That's not our intent. Our intent is to staff it in such a way that we do not hit his maximum, but we use him for what we want to use him for the full fiscal year.
All right.
It is
So what?
he will not schedule himself.
Right.
We will be scheduling him.
The plan now is
So
that he will
he's-
work
he's
3 days
going
a
to-
week, 5 to 6 hours a day.
At what, does he go on the grid? Is he a place on the grid here?
We haven't placed him yet, have we?
Where is he on the grid? I want to know his hourly wage.
We haven't placed him yet
When does
because
he get placed?
when you approve the position and the budget,
Well, I couldn't approve it unless I knew what his projected hourly wage is. He must have a job description
the,
and have a projected hourly wage.
No question.
what was the,
What? I'm thinking 15, 18 hours a week, as we said.
That person is a current employee.
yes,
His current
And he's
employee.
currently being paid a wage.
Correct.
Yes.
Does that now fit in the grid today?
yes, but that will not be the wage that he's paid when he transfers out, because he has put his retirement on hold, and he is getting paid more. He's going to go back on retirement.
Okay.
He is not getting
I
paid.
understand the process. What I'm really interested in is
I know what you're asking.
that there isn't, I'm interested in what the hourly wage is going to be. That's what I'm really interested in.
We can have the HR director take a look at that and
see what his
tentatively
job
place this
description is and
individual
the hourly wage.
on the grid, you know.
I want to just make sure that there's no more benefits accruing to this person than there is to anyone else.
Benefits,
This person would not be benefit eligible at all.
No, I don't mean by health insurance and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, taking a special look at this position. I don't know how else to phrase it.
Okay. Are we all set here? Moving on. Unemployment. And that's actually going to be an area that I end up looking at. We had a pretty lengthy discussion about that last night. No, I'm sorry, that was workers' comp. What is the highlights here, if I could ask of the Budget Committee?
Where's unemployment?
I don't know.
What page?
It's on page 5.
It went up 15,000.
Last year. All right, I've got the page. Can you repeat your question?
What are the highlights here? What's changing?
All right.
If I graph these numbers,
all right,
it would look like an EKG.
We have seen an increase in fiscal 14 because of a number of, on the other end of Pearl Street, the layoffs during the summer for the education personnel. And the budget was $35,014. We are looking at it being $45,015 because we're anticipating not as much as we had in the last year, but because especially for the fact that there have been a number of new hires in education, and the fact that they do not have PTS, that it's advisable to lay them off to make sure that you're going to bring them, or to not rehire them until you're sure you're going to bring them back. And so, as such, you have to lay them off.
Which happens every year. That's not a new thing this year.
No, it's just that we have a larger number of teachers in that category, or education personnel in that category.
Okay.
You've had a lot of retirements 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years ago out of the education sector.
Okay. I have no more questions here. Barbara.
Does the summer help that gets hired by the DPW and by the golf course count? Okay.
Now, any seasonal, we register with the DUA, and any seasonal employees are not eligible.
Okay.
All set. Moving on. Central purchasing, page 13.
I think we covered that last night.
Yeah, but we have to cover it again. Again, the big change here is the RICO contract, which is not organized crime, incidentally. And that came up in a meeting today. It's ROCOH.
Right. Not related to the federal criminal statute.
Yes. By coincidence, Maureen's back tonight. If you have anything you forgot to ask her last night.
We noticed. Thank you for being back, Maureen. Did you have anything to add? The question I've always had here was, and it's telephone. This is the bill that we get for all the phones in the town. Is it paid for? Is it billed to one place and then disseminated out? I know it also includes cell phones and things of that nature.
The telephone bill that we get here is for all the telephone bills in town. The individual departments will pay their own mobile bills.
Okay, but was it 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we put a new switch in town? I sound like a broken record here.
I know.
We're supposed to disconnect the hundreds of hard lines, and there should have been a massive savings here, and I have never seen it materialize. The second comment I'd make, and I don't, this is just for the record. The second thing is that have we ever consolidated and looked at all of these mobile phones and put it under one umbrella and thought about centralizing that? Because if you go to every department and look at their plans there, and you know what the plans are changing by the day out there today, have we looked at putting a rope around that.
It is
because-
something we intend to look at. We have not looked at it yet. Again, on the list of priorities, it's especially Maureen's priorities has been kind of towards the bottom. But it is something we need to look at. We'd like to get everybody on the same standard plan.
There are contract vendors out there that do this, and I was looking at, actually, it came up in a MAPO question today, talking about this in the audits that different firms do to look at the telephone usage. I know that since we put in the T1 lines, that our costs have gone down. Last year it was 52,000. We have, I think we requested like 49 this year. So we're trying to, and
Yeah, but it was 44 in 13. And now we're budgeting 49. It just keeps going up.
And that too is actually from
the actual was 52,036
But that's because you have 2,800.
that I had somewhere.
I'm looking at telephone, fiscal 13 was 44. I know what we budgeted in 14. I don't, is that an air actual number? Is that we're saying we're going to land at 51?
Because you got $2,857 left over from 13.
I don't have where I got the, I
Okay.
got it off a budget
My only
report.
point is it doesn't seem to go down. I know you're saying it's going down from 14 to 15. I'm saying from 13 to 15, it's going up. And I don't know why. And we did have an outside consultant come in and go through all these lines and see what was necessary and not when we bought a new switch for the town. So anyway, something to put on your list.
Yes.
We'll keep moving forward. Any other questions here, Bruce?
The $4,400 for regional purchasing services.
That was previously in the selectmen's budget. That is one of the regional purchasing groups we belong to and have belonged to. It's been moved out of the selectmen's budget into the centralized purchasing budget because it is a centralized purchasing contract. Maureen regularly attends their meetings. We have done, it's all part of a group and regional bid. You want to add anything?
We belong to several different purchasing groups. The most active one that I attend the monthly meetings for is Sursage. That's the Southeast Regional Sourcing Group. They do a majority of DPW procurements. We realize huge savings on that. They also do our supplies, of which we now have WB Mason at 74%, which is about 26% lower than the state contract price. So that's a great savings. The schools use that contract as well. So it pays for itself.
So this 4,400, we're paying for the school side also out of this?
It's for the town of Stoughton to
Okay.
use all the contracts.
And has traditionally been in the selectmen's budget. It's not a new item, it's just an item that's been relocated now that we have a centralized purchasing budget.
And the $75,000 photostat and photograph service, that's all the stuff that you're taking out of other departments and bringing it into this line, or?
Copiers.
Correct, that's the copier lease.
Because I have a question too.
Okay.
It involves 22 machines.
I got you, Bob.
Okay.
Barbara?
Okay, so when you were talking last night, I went home and thought about what you said. And so you said that the $75,000 is for the copiers and the service for the copiers if they break, and for the ink for the copiers, the toner, all that?
On some of the machines, it does include the ink. On, like, the color machines, you come with one startup kit. On the black and whites, it comes with 3 startup kits. And those are a lot of the smaller machines that they might, in the 3 years of the lease, might never go through the 3 sets of toner that they get.
Oh, it's going to go through it. I was just curious if, and then you said it was 1 cent a copy.
Less than 1 cent a copy.
Right.
Point.
So that money is not in that 75,000. That penny a copy, if the copier stuff runs out, all that stuff is somewhere else?
It would be in their office supplies
That's
for the
their office
various.
supply money?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I was curious as to where that money was. Thank you.
Roberta, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mr. Hill. Maybe I missed this somehow. the telephone line, the 49,000, that's going through the consortium, is that correct? Is that what you said?
It's a T1 line, I believe, that they brought in a year and a half, 2 years ago, that it makes our phone calls much less expensive. We dial 8 to go on that line. If you want an outside line, you dial 9 and you pay the Verizon rate. It is something that I've been working with Reggie on to look at our lines, because we had some inactive lines, so we've been, slowly but surely auditing some of our vacant lines. So that's for all of the town buildings, we pay that.
So
we just don't pay the mobile charges.
You don't pay what charges?
The cell phones.
Okay, so these are the landlines, in other words, right?
Correct.
So one of your carriers is Verizon?
Yes.
And what else? What other carrier?
Verizon is Verizon, and we have XO, which is our T1 provider, that we pay a monthly fee on that.
So as a municipality, do we have to pay all of these surcharges, like Verizon collects a real estate acquisition fee surcharge, they collect this, their surcharges are increasing every single month. So do we have to pay all of those surcharges also? Because I can very easily see where your phone charges would go up if we as a municipality have to pay all those surcharges.
I believe we do have to pay the surcharges.
So close to I would say 1/5 of the bill is surcharges.
I will look at that further when
If you look, I think you get pretty close to that. And the other thing I would just wanted to think about was the copy machines. You're including, when it was mentioned the other night that you would receive the repair under the lease and you would receive the toner.
Yes.
If you go through that original box of how many cylinders they give you, probably 3 cylinders or 2, you're going to go through that very quickly. So does the money here include the tone is expensive? Where is that money included if there has to be extra toner purchased?
The extra toner would be part of the supplies of the various operating budgets.
So each individual budget then would purchase their own toner?
I know as far as the copy machine that we have up here, the toner comes out of centralized purchasing, because this is the work cost for the town hall. Every department, if they have large jobs, color jobs do come up. We have the biggest unit in the town hall up here, so that's covered. The toner is covered under centralized purchasing.
All right, one last question is, if you charge people, let's say charging them for the transcript, and you can charge the person, the transcript of the zoning board hearing or whatever, you can charge them for the time that it takes for the person, the least experienced person in the office to make that transcript. Do we also include some charges for the paper? Is that included in any charge that comes back into this?
It's 20 cents a page if you're copying something. That money goes back into the general fund. We can't put it back into our budget.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, moving on. Central purchasing to town council, page 10. So again, this kind of looks like an EKG. Comments?
And we did find we have extinguished some of these purchase orders. And again, this was downloaded in November, so some of the purchase orders have been extinguished. I think overall we've cut the budget from 350. That's not bad. We cut the budget from 354 to 276. We did not go lower than that because we have a $150,000 appropriation from the special town meeting, as you recall, for South Coast Rail. I wanted to leave a little money in this budget in case we were to exceed that 150,000. That's starting to heat up. And I wanted to have something to fall back on so that we wouldn't have to call a special town meeting unless it was absolutely necessary. So I did not take it down any further than to the 276.
Okay. Other questions? Moving on. Town manager, page 7. So your FTEs are flat because you reorged and moved a person out of here down to the Board of Health, and now you've also brought in
A person in at a much higher rate.
Right. And that would be the economic
The economic development specialist.
Okay. Any questions on this, Pat?
Yeah, it's just more of a comment. I really can live with seeing the expenses brought up a level to this detail, but I'm getting more and more concerned as the night goes on, not having the salaries at a lower level, because we've discussed a lot of reorg that I didn't even realize was happening until I sat through these hearings, and it just concerns me, I guess, that somebody who wasn't sitting here listening to all this would have no idea how many positions and how many reorgs are happening, and it's just more of a comment. I don't feel as comfortable about the salaries being at such a high level because you can't see all the movement. Just a comment.
Scott?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the town manager. The economic development specialist. What do you think you're going to get out of this?
Well, just remember the town meeting last year approved this position.
I understand.
Okay.
But I'm talking to him because he's the boss, and he's going to watch this.
The master plan has an economic development component. One of the primary responsibilities initially would be to implement the economic development component of that plan. Another responsibility is to begin to interact with existing businesses to make sure their needs are being met so that we can retain businesses and jobs in the town. It's not as, it's typically not a recruitment as much as you're working to retain your existing businesses. That could involve assisting people in looking for, say, larger quarters because they need to relocate. An example I'll use is I have met with somebody who wants to move here from Waltham. They have a factory in Waltham. They are at their capacity under zoning in Waltham. They cannot expand. So they're looking at space in Campanelli Park for potentially to expand. Those people end up now in my office or in Noreen's office. They would end up in the economic development specialist's office.
And those are walk-ins.
Yeah.
We want the economic development person reaching out.
Correct.
Okay.
And I say the primary thing there would be some marketing with reaching out, but in my mind, the first priority is to reach out to our existing businesses and find out what they need and what we can do to keep them and their jobs in town. That would be priority one.
Do you have like a time set on this? Like, are you going to watch this transition, and then at some point, if it doesn't come to some kind of fruition where it's producing, are we going to revisit it, or are we just going to carry it? Because we went through this grant writer system before that
I'm always
David
open to
ended up doing
revisiting.
all the grants and the dead weight sat here.
Yeah.
And that's what I, you know
If
what I
it
mean?
doesn't work, then I'm not bashful about revisiting it and
I
saying,
mean,
look, we need
I've
to rework our
seen,
model.
I've seen this come on board in different towns, and, you know, we're gonna go thump out, we're gonna do this, and know what it turns into? It turns into, seminars, lunches, and stuff like that, and people who are gonna come here will come here, but they're gonna come here because it's all economics. I mean, you got the guy's name, economic development, but it's all economics. If it fits their bill, they're gonna do it. If they're gonna get a good bang out of it, it'll work. I mean,
All I can say is that the idea is to grow the commercial and industrial tax base to lessen the load on the
well,
residential tax
we're
base.
eroding our commercial and industrial tax base very fast by allowing all the 40Bs to drop upon it. So I don't know, maybe that can be part of it to protect that before we try to, you know.
I believe we're to the position now where we no longer have to permit a 40B because we are over the threshold.
I know, that number bounces just like everything else. It comes on, it goes off, it drops, it this, that.
Yeah, which is why the board actually entertained, and these people will be appearing before the Community Preservation Committee. A lot of these housing developments that were built in the 60s and 70s had 40-year affordability or 30-year affordability. Those are now coming off, and there is a process that allows them to stay on. And the Board of Selectmen is very interested in keeping anybody on they can keep on because they don't want to have to deal with more 40Bs.
I'm just saying, I hope you got a good grip on watching this. You know what I mean? I'm sure you do, but.
The other thing I left out is that this person will also be a person who will be looking for grants. For example, grants for the downtown, that sort of thing.
And I'd have to add that last year our view of this is it was a return on investment position. Much like a number of the other ones, it was a component or contingent of any of the new positions we added that we'd see a return on it. And we certainly will be watching.
Yeah. If we don't see a return on it, then again, I'm not adverse to saying, look, this was a mistake, we need to do something else.
Right. John?
So, is this person or somebody in town looking at all the vacant storefronts and businesses and making sure they're maintained or
No, that would not be.
or filled or something?
You have an abandoned building ordinance on, proposed for this town meeting. That would be the responsibility of the building official, not the
Okay,
economic development.
because,
But the
I mean, as you know, driving down,
Yep.
you know, it's discouraging.
I understand that. And the economic development coordinator's job would be one of recruiting folks in to fill those storefronts.
And
But making sure they're maintained is in fact, under the new bylaw that's proposed, the responsibility of the building official.
so would that cover the former Chengdu restaurant site that's?
No, that's buildings, but filling a new business in there would be economic development.
Okay, because.
Thank you for answering that for me.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
But, I mean, that's been, what is this, 6, 7 years now? It's like
Yeah. but
3?
again,
No, it's got to be more than 3.
But that's why there's an article in this year's warrant for it, so
That's
that
why,
we can take action.
Currently, our building official doesn't have the kind of authority that other towns have chosen to grant their building officials for abandoned buildings. It's a local option, and the board has encouraged us to take a look at that. We've taken a look at it, and we are proposing an abandoned building bylaw that does in fact give authority to the building official to do something about those buildings. He's limited in what he can do now because we don't have an ordinance that empowers him to do certain things he can do under the code if the town has chosen to give him that authority.
Well, I support that effort.
Ms. Walsh, did I see your?
No, Ms. Walsh is just listening to all the gab.
Okay, it looked like you were trying to make eye contact. Mr. Anzavino?
I'll be very quick. as Mr. Hartman just said, we do have a couple of articles in this year's warrant for anti-blight, if you will, and so forth, to try and get some of these things done. Just to address Mr. Carrara as far as some of the concerns, I can assure you I am working very, very closely with council, maintaining and going, constantly monitoring the level we're at with our housing inventory. The project that came before us the other night for presidential courts, looking for our support to bring us back. I mean, if we get these things in, we're very close to being at a point where we won't have to worry until the next census is done and we see where we are. And it'll give us a good number of years, which is only 6 more years now, but it will put us in a position where we'd have a lot more say in what could be developed or where it would be developed, because we will be over the threshold, unless the state changes their rules. But I assure you, I talk with council monthly anyway to keep on top of that, and we are trying to get a few things taken care of to ensure we are at that point. So just to put your mind at ease.
Thank you. Thank you. Roberta.
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Hill. I want to just follow up on what Mrs. Coburn was talking about with the reorganization and the different budgets. We were given this, the sheets, I don't know what they're called. It says position, then grade, range, town. Do you know what those are?
Yes.
All right. Now, if I look at those sheets, I see, for instance, your department, Mr. Hartman, is at the top. So I'm not just to make it easier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've got town manager. There's 5 people. I can understand because they're on the grid here. The grid. But I go to other departments and it says unassigned, unassigned, pending, unassigned, so forth. There are many of these departments people are unassigned. So how do we individually figure out the salaries of these people?
Those people are unassigned because their unions have not settled. So their salaries are exactly the same as the salaries that are in the fiscal 14 budget. Anyone who's not been is unassigned to the grid is a member of a bargaining unit who has not yet entered into a contract.
All right, so unassigned means it's FY14 budget.
Correct.
All right, FY14 salary. What's pending mean?
I'll let you explain that one.
Which
pending.
Which,
P-E-N-D-I-N-G. I've got treasurer.
Pending. 5 seconds. Spell it.
I've got treasurer collector, program administrator 2, confidential. Pending.
That's a position that's right now under negotiation for impact
so
bargaining.
It's being negotiated.
Right, that's why it's pending. But it will be assigned.
Okay.
Thank you.
So once these contracts are settled, the people that are represented in these different positions will be assigned a place on this grid that you gave us?
Yes.
Correct.
All right. Now, just to help us out further, how many hours are there in the work week for town hall employees?
Town hall.
Yes.
35.
35.
Unless you're SVNA.
The visiting nurse.
Yes.
That's the same for SPAEA?
And every other department of the town, for instance, police, fire, et cetera, have their own number of hours that represents a complete work week?
Well, you have to realize that the fire is 24 on, 24 off, 24
I understand
on,
that.
5.
Got it.
And then the police have their
own.
Yes.
Yeah.
I get
But
that.
And DPW is 40.
Yeah.
All right.
And police and fire average, over a 28-day period, have to average 42 hours a week.
So if we wanted to break out their salaries, then for the departments that we were able to do, we would have to use the salaries for the previous year, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, I've got that one. Thank you, I appreciate that, but I do have another question. Well, it's not a question, it's a comment. The comment is, I read an article in the newspaper regarding the 40Bs. And the governor is thinking about exempting all over 55 projects that were limited to over 55 projects from the housing count. That has not become law yet, but they're thinking about doing that, hoping to encourage more diversity outside of urban centers in housing. So if we're counting on some of the developments that were limited to over 55, or if it means, or if the legislation is going to mean, or the rules that would be changing would mean the houses within a mixed development that were for over 55, low income, they would be exempted from your inventory, then my question would be...
Wait a minute, this was a comment, no questions.
Well,
please, ask your question.
I think we have to think about the fact that if that comes to reality, are we still going to be as safe as we thought we were? That's all.
Yeah.
I think it's something to think about. Because it's Aaron Gornstein. This is his idea to Governor Duval in order to increase diversity in housing throughout communities.
I think an up and down answer would be yes.
Yeah.
It would be problematic.
It would be very problematic.
It would be, well, that's what I'm thinking, it would be problematic, unless you allowed each of the over 55s to come before the ZBA and exempt them from being over 55s. And the homeowners associations were not.
You have something that's even closer problematic with the 40Gs.
So at any rate, maybe you want to take a look at that, because that's one of the great ideas from the Housing Appeals Committee and those associated with the Housing Appeals Committee to Patrick Duval.
Yes, Mr. Antovino.
I'll just reiterate, I'm working on this very closely with council to monitor the situation.
Okay. Moving on. The Selectmen's budget, page 20. I'll entertain no comments about the awards line in this budget, by the way.
I didn't prepare this budget.
He didn't prepare this budget, I did.
Oh, wait a minute, this is the one you disavow?
Well, do you want my comment on it?
No, I don't. Please.
The Selectmen's budget's down for two reasons. Well, one, because the contingency for collective bargaining has been removed, and the other is that there are items in the Selectmen's budget that more appropriately belong to the manager's budget, and those have been moved to the manager's budget, which is actually a couple of the line items that did increase in the manager's budget. You'll also note that the $4,000 for the group purchasing was in this budget and has now been moved to purchasing. So what is left here is really just the expenses involved with the Selectmen's office.
Heading towards zero, good. Any other thoughts? Pat?
There's nothing in the reserves for collective bargaining for 15, so if a union were to settle, there'd be no way.
It has to come out of the cash that's on the revenue sheet.
Okay, so, okay.
Plus, there's money left over from this year that's still unexpended.
There are articles, the money in the reserve of the past year.
Yes, but that'll fall to free cash in July 1st.
Yes.
Correct. But it is available for anybody who settles between now and town meeting, should town meeting choose to vote it.
Yep,
Yes,
and that's why it's there.
They should accelerate.
But can I just follow, how would we appropriate that, though? If it's not here and it's not in the department budgets, we can't just take it from the revenue sheet and then add it to a budget. If we've approved this budget with nothing and we've approved the other budgets with nothing else added to it. We couldn't move that
Special-
money from the
special
rest.
Have to do it in a special.
Okay.
We have articles in for the
I'm-
The goal is to get them to settle this year.
But it would have to go through a special town meeting.
That's correct.
After this town meeting.
After this town meeting, it would have to go to a special.
Okay. Moving on, MBTA, it's 0.
0.
Any discussion?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is like civil defense. When is this going to disappear from the budget? We had civil defense in the budget for like 25 years, and it
With-
was 0 every year.
With the
It's a
FinCom's
waste of
direction, we'll
paper.
drop it next year.
Very nice.
I will make a note.
Well, actually, I think we could probably just choose not to include it in the FinCom book this year. How's that?
Mike, it depends on what we do with the new station.
Okay.
Yeah, it does. to a certain
Hearing
extent,
no
true.
other business except for the fact that we've got meetings
Then we'll
next
re-add
week
it.
on Monday and Wednesday. They start at 7:30, by the way, just to know. Those ads are in the penny saver. And if we have new members to be sworn in, it's already on the agenda. The agendas are posted, so we're all set there. Working on the following week's penny savers, advertisements for public hearings. Having no other business before this committee this evening, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Peter, Pat, second. All those in favor? All those opposed?
Are you
Meeting
awarding
is adjourned.
yourself a gold
Yes.
star?